So I am here with two of my favorite people here recently that I've been chatting with a lot lately. Matt Hoh, as y'all know, I've been friends with Matthew for a long time. And so, how you been doing, buddy?
I'm well, Tommy. It's good to see you, man.
Yeah. Too bad you're not a senator.
Well, that wasn't going to happen, but I appreciate it. Thank you for that.
I was hoping though. My fingers were crossed. I was like, he's Green Party, but still, let's do it. Let's
Yeah,
do
I mean,
it.
there's no way in under this. It was never going to happen, but we achieved some things, I think, in terms of we had some limited goals and what we wanted to accomplish. I had some goals, and we met some of those, so it wasn't a total waste of time. But
Yeah.
it's running as an independent or third party is in our current system is near impossible.
Yeah. It really is. And then Kym Robinson. What's going on, Kym?
G'day, how you going, guys? It's good to finally meet you both.
I'm glad we finally made this work, man. Me and you have been trying to do this. And part of the
Yeah,
thing is I have another friend that lives in Australia and he invites me on his podcast all the time, but he schedules around me. So I don't
yep.
know how to schedule it. He does
That's okay.
it. So every time I
I,
try to schedule you, I'm like, okay, I'm dead now. I don't know if I can do this.
that's fine. I'm kind of versatile as well, so yeah, it's not too bad.
If it were up to me, you'd be on at 4 a.m. your time, though.
That's right.
So, so, so there's that. But so we were going to talk a little bit about Israel and Hamas, probably a little bit about Ukraine and Russia. I think both of these stories tie into each other. And I don't know if you have any information on this, Matt. If not, it's not a big deal. I've been milking this, trying to find somebody who knows anything about Azerbaijan and Armenia. So if we can touch on that some, if you have any information that I don't have, I would love to hit on that. But the first thing I wanted to say is there are a lot of people on the right and that are calling Hamas a terrorist organization. And there's this mainstream narrative that if a terrorist organization targets women and children, it is not going to make progress. And historically, that is not true. And I'm not saying that it's not true with Hamas. I'm saying it's not true historically. The ANC, which was the African National Congress of South Africa, was a terrorist organization. Nelson Mandela was arrested for 20 years for bombing places. They were known for going into these small enclaves in South Africa and performing what they would call necklaces, where they would put a tire around somebody's neck, fill it with gasoline, light it on fire. And it was only because of the pressure of the Western world on South Africa, not on the ANC, but on South Africa to end apartheid, that apartheid ended. And the ANC is now the strongest political party in South Africa. What people are missing is that it's not the terrorism or the quote unquote war crimes, the shutting off food, water, and electricity to citizens. That's the big deal. The big deal is whose side is the power on. And people don't want to talk about that. They want to have this utopian vision in their mind that it's just international law. It's just this. It's just, and it's not just that. We can see that at home, right? Where we see BLM burn down businesses, set a church on fire across the street from the White House, attack the White House, but then January 6th protesters are put in prison without charges. Like it's about power, who's in power and who's doing what. It depends on who's in power. And not enough people talk about the power aspect of what's going on with the wars.
I think it's messaging too and narrative, because you know what you're saying about terrorism and all that. If you during the 70s, especially, there was a lot of terrorist organizations, but the media and mainstream and people would call them freedom fighters, like the PLO, the IRA, and things like that. There's a lot more sentimentality and sympathy to organizations that were doing horrible things like hijackings and taking hostages and killing civilians. But is that a reaction to US foreign policy and decolonialization and things like that? Because it's now in the post 9/11 world, people are extremely, I don't know, they use the word terrorist all the time, but I think the intention to kill innocent civilians versus the collateral damage mentality is something that the average person, and the average person is where all the discourse is won when it comes to a liberal democracy like Australia and and that narrative is what matters most. And so here in Australia, it's almost split down the middle as to who people support. Like people need the binary. So there are a lot of people that are sympathetic to Palestine and are overlooking even the worst egregious allegations like the beheading of babies, the raping at the music festival. They're overlooking that because they understand that what Israel has been doing to West Bank and Gaza and even attacking Syria is bullshit. But at the same time, there are people that are just vehemently anti-Islamic because they are still holding on to ISIS and Al Qaeda and stuff like that. And so anyone in Australia, there's still that old-fashioned racist bigotry in some people, especially older generations. They look at them as being a different. They're non-Christian. They're not living in suburbs. They're not living in an atomic family structure like us. So therefore, they're aliens, and so therefore they're easily to hate. And so you've got that binary, and I think the trouble is the binaries. It's making them versus us, in group versus out group, and that seems to be the mentality that's prevalent. And so when it comes to what you're saying about terrorism and all that, it's sometimes I just think it's a matter of timing, like as in our mindset in the period. Because the Viet Cong, for example, in the 60s they were communist terrorists. Then through the 70s and afterwards, people understood them to be more freedom fighters. So I think it's a relative concept.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a more subjective term in the English language than terrorist, right? And that's the old saw, right? One man's terrorist, the other man's freedom fighter. I think a lot of it for me when I look at this, because you're right, Tommy, there have been very successful terrorist campaigns, if you will, right? The IRA eventually got what it wanted, right? I mean, the Irgun, the Jewish militias had a campaign of terror against the British colonial authorities in in Palestine. I think a lot of it comes down back to whether it's going to be successful or not based upon a constituency, who your constituency is, and who is the adversary's constituency. And if you have an adversary, say, has an out that has an ability to exit, at some point, does the exit look better than staying, right? So the British have an exit out of Northern Ireland, right? The British have an exit out of Palestine, right? I mean, so I think you see some successful movements that way because basically it comes down to the will is just not there. There's a better option for us. It's to get out of Vietnam. Might take way too long for anyone who's rational and has an ounce of wisdom, but eventually that option is taken because the alternative is to stick with something that you just don't have the will for, and your constituency just doesn't want as bad or need as bad as who you're fighting as. I think we're seeing in Israel and Palestine, of course, are constituencies that have no exits. And so where does it go to? But certainly the idea of terrorism, right? Of achieving something by terrorizing somebody else. I mean, hey, that's how we did it in World War II, right? We burned down Dresden. We burned down 100 Japanese cities, right? And we won.
One of the things I have an issue with is that this is framed as Israel and Palestine. And I think it's Israel and Hamas, and Palestine has been stuck in the middle. Right? Like, is that fair? Like, you were there, Matt. I don't know how.
Yeah, I've never been in Gaza, so I can't speak to like the support for Hamas directly. And I've seen polling and reports of polling that shows that if there's an election in Gaza, Hamas would not be reelected. If there's an election in the West Bank, Fatah or the PLO would not be reelected. And I can tell you in the West Bank that for the 3 weeks we were there, every time the Palestinians we were with were out of earshot, they stopped complaining about the Israelis and started complaining about the Palestinian Authority. I mean, they viewed the PA as a bigger problem than the Israelis because they were the collaborators, right? They're the ones who have enabled all of this. So I think there's got to be some who view. I'm sure it's mixed, right? There are some who see Hamas as a national liberation front, others who see them as a necessary evil, others who despise them, but this is what we've got. So I think it's probably a mixed bag. But yeah, I mean, certainly I think that's what we all come back to. We all come down to, right? This idea that our heart bleeds for those who are stuck in the middle. It's the same with the Israelis. I mean, the Israelis, you meet, some of them want to exactly continue the ethnic cleansing. Others are, well, it's a bad situation and I've got to protect my own, so I'll side with this government and its policies. And others who want nothing to do with it. And all anecdotally, but reports of Israelis leaving because this is why the right wing in Israel has gotten so strong, because the left and the seculars have left, right, or are leaving, right? They don't want to be a part of it. So but you think about on October 7th, those who were killed, how many of those were, those kids at the rave? You think they were really invested in the geopolitics of it all, or right? And so your heart breaks for them, just as it breaks for all those Palestinians who are getting killed.
Right. Go ahead, Kym. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. And well, exactly. And that's what I was about to say. It's almost like innocent people are used as pawns. Like,
yeah,
they're like whether they're to be murdered, to be hostages, or like if they're constituents. And do you think also the settler colonial mentality that we have, let's say, in Australia, the United States, in South Africa, and places like that, it sort of colors our perspective a little bit, because we live in a place that has benefited from, people coming over and making a nation out of it. But then the natives get put on the reservations, Aboriginal communities here. And we're just witnessing what happened in the 19th century, this 18th century, but in a microwaved up process. And so there's a certain degree and then you add into the evangelical right in the United States, where that adds into the whole apocalyptic mindset. So you've got all these other elements which sort of color people's perspective when it comes to how they view this conflict. And it's messed up, because the babies, the kids, they're just innocent. They're literally innocent. Like they have nothing to do with any of this policy or Hamas's reaction to it, whether they think that they're righteous or not. It's insanity. It's just insanity.
Yeah, I'd also say, Kym, following that train of thought there, so Tommy and I grew up watching, they were still on television all the time, black and white cowboy and Indian films. And that colors our perspective.
The Lone Ranger, man.
Yeah, that's in our subconscious. This idea of we have an expression in the U.S. off the reservation. They've gone off the reservation. I mean, this idea that they've broken out, and they're going to do no good. They're going to rape our women. They're going to kill our cattle. They're going to steal our land. And I mean, I think for so many Americans, particularly those of us of our generation and older, I think that does color our perspective in the sense of who's right and who's wrong on this, right? And where our sympathies lie. I mean, in the general sense, I know not the three of us, but in the general sense, yeah.
My great grandma was on the Trail of Tears.
Wow.
She was a little girl. They were where my mom's side of the family got the name from is because they were Cherokee Indians on Coker Creek in Tennessee that were pushed into Oklahoma onto the reservation that was supposed to be Oklahoma. They escaped, which ran the Trail of Tears up into Oklahoma. So they ran them from Tennessee up into Oklahoma, and they escaped, made it down to Mississippi, lived in the wilderness for a while, which is why there's a gap in my family history that you can't find some people. And then suddenly my great grandma pops up, marries my great grandfather. They were both full-blooded Cherokee. And then that's where my mom's dad comes from. So yeah, there is that aspect of it. Thing is, here in the US, we don't have the attacks, right? So there's a certain amount of it that we can kind of understand and look at, but there was a certain amount of assimilation that came along with it, right? It might not have been perfect, and it still to this day is not perfect, but it's better. And as bad as we want to say the US is at foreign policy and this, that, and the other, at some point, sometimes I step back and I go, well, at least it's not that place. At least it's not that, because things could be a lot worse. You know what I'm saying? Like there's not a good,
it could be much better though too.
it could be much better, but there's not a place on the planet that is better. You know what I'm saying? So it's like one of those situations where it's like, I wish it were a lot better, but at the same time, it's like, all right, well, at least it's not as bad. At least we're not doing that. And I have plenty of complaints. One of the things I had mentioned to Dave DeCamp when I spoke to him earlier today, and I know Kym had a chance to go back and listen to this podcast, was during the more barbaric times. All right. A smaller force would attack a larger force. That larger force would go in. They would kill all the males, infant to elderly. They would kill them all. And then that would get rid of the opportunity of there being the revenge factor or the terrorist factor coming back to them, right? This is what they would do. I had spoken to somebody a while back that said the reason that we had so much issues in Afghanistan is America wasn't willing to do what it had to do, partially because of that liberal mindset, that mindset of being empathetic and sympathetic to humanity and human life. Sometimes I feel like what we're witnessing is these terrorist factions, whether it's the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas, Hezbollah, they're going to survive and succeed because of their lack of empathy.
I don't know if they're exclusively not empathetic, because we just don't get to see what it's like to have starving kids, like say, like with an embargo, for example, or a blockade, or attacking waterworks or attacking medical facilities, and that stuff is asymmetric, if you will, but that does a lot more than just going in and randomly shooting people or beheading them, etc. Like that is visceral and that's gory and that's disgusting. That's like, horror movie stuff. But to actually completely starve and punish an entire population or a demographic, that's inhumane. That is incredibly horrible as well. But we can't relate to that, because there's no movies based on a blockade where you're slowly watching children die and wither away. There's movies based on slashers and spree killers and things like that, and we can understand that. So every time a terrorist does something like that, which is like popping a pimple, it's gory and gross, that's we understand that, but we don't understand the other perspective. And I think, like what you're saying about the United States and being the best place, etc., do you feel that manifested mindset and that whole bright shining example on the hill that Americans tell themselves, because that's an American view, not here in Australia. We don't see America as being the best place in the world. Not many people go, oh, I want to move to the United States. Not many people think America's got more above us than us. Like that perspective is a very American perspective, and it's always Americans telling the rest of us. But do you feel that proof of concept that America became the most successful, the most powerful empire, the most powerful nation, republic, etc., is what places like, say, dare I mention, Hitler's Germany, or South Africa, or the Israeli Zionists in Israel with the Nakba and the right to return, they're using that as proof of concept, because that degree of racialism, that degree of civilization is best, is what drives a lot of this type of imperialism. And this, like you said, it's ancient, but this whole Pax Romana mentality that still exists even in American political discourse is insane. Like,
well, I think we should. I think the way I look at it is from the Ron Paul perspective, right?
Yeah.
So you can't be a republic and an empire at the same time.
But you are.
Well, it's not. It's one or the other. It's an empire. It's not a republic. As a republic, I think that would be the most perfect form of what we were supposed to be, and not to say it is absolutely the ideal for everything, but I think that is the most perfect. I think that when it made this switch under Woodrow Wilson to becoming an empire, then it became what you see today. And so that's what people are recognizing. That's what they're familiar with. And I hate the empire as much as you do. I'm not going to excoriate you, but I'm saying for the citizens of the country, the people that live within the borders, it is probably better for us than it is for most people in other countries,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because we at least have a standard that we force upon the elected officials. Now, it doesn't always work, but like, let's say like with COVID, right? In Australia, they locked y'all down.
Not
And
all of us. No.
well, all right. Well, the majority of people, I would say, is that correct?
More in Victoria, but that's another thing, like the messaging, because during COVID, I'm getting told what we were experiencing in Australia from people
And
that
you're
were living
like,
in the
that's
States.
not me.
Yeah, like the lockdowns were probably worse in parts of the United States than they were in most of Australia. It was only in places like Victoria and then towards the end in WA, West Australia. It's like firearm laws. Like according to Americans, I don't have any firearms. According, you know what I mean? Like, there's all these like these memes that go around that are talking about other cultures, and it denigrates other cultures, and it creates a worldview, like a keyhole perspective. But then what happens is it hurts the messaging of anything that's pro liberty, pro anything, because the people that are living in these lands, we know otherwise.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
like we know the truth. We know that, well, hang on, that's not true. I own this, I own that. We can get access to this, but we're told otherwise. And then when people create their worldview from the outside and then they try to, impose it on everyone else, it creates a supremacist mindset, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So then you think, oh, in the United States, we're the most freest country in the world. Australia ain't perfect, believe me. But like, I don't think we're free either. But it's not. I think there's certain areas where the United, like you're saying, the United States under Woodrow Wilson. But what about Teddy Roosevelt? What about Manifest Destiny? What about the Whiskey Rebellion? What about all these
Teddy
other?
Roosevelt was horrible. He
Well, even Abraham Lincoln, like the war of the Civil War.
I mentioned Woodrow Wilson because Woodrow Wilson was the first to, number one, he's the one who accepted the Federal Reserve, and that intake brought on a global currency and brought on a global example. And then his whole idea where he took Manifest Destiny from going from sea to shining sea, and he said, well, if we want to continue getting rich, we're going to have to expand beyond the sea to shining sea. We're going to have to go to South America. We're going to have to go here. We're going to have to go there. And we're going to have to begin to expand everywhere else, because otherwise then we're cutting off our ability to bring in resources and wealth. That was kind of why I was bringing up Woodrow Wilson.
If you guys at the Libertarian Institute ever have a clubhouse or a building or an office, I fully expect to walk in there and see a dartboard with Woodrow Wilson's face on it.
I hate that guy.
All you guys do. And I've learned a lot from you about that, because we grow up getting taught that Woodrow Wilson was this great champion for democracy and all other sorts of things, and he was not. But I want to get back to the point that you all first started talking about, this idea of subjugation, and the point that you brought up, Tommy, about killing, how they would do it in the old times, right? And when I was in Afghanistan, this sergeant, he was on at least his second deployment to Afghanistan, probably had an Iraq deployment. And he said, we just need to start shooting the 12-year-olds. And it wasn't because he was a child murderer or he was sick or anything like that. He was making a point of how absurd this whole thing was, this whole campaign, this whole counterinsurgency campaign, this winning hearts and minds, because he knew that he would come back on another deployment and that 12-year-old would now be a 15-year-old or a 17-year-old carrying a rifle, and he'd have to shoot them. I mean, so he was trying to point out the absurdity of that. And I think that ties into, Kym, what you were talking before about settler colonialism. And settler colonialism, I think you do have to exterminate. You have to not even subjugate, but exterminate in order to achieve success, in order to have that type of ability to propagate on the land as you want to, because otherwise the people that you're usurping are always going to be fighting against you. And there's always going to be that blood debt. There's always going to be that revenge. You killed my father. You killed my grandfather, right? It's like from The Princess Bride. My name's Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Yeah,
right?
but that guy was cool.
Yeah, right. But like that type of thing. So I think that some of it, and I think what you get into then is, because the United States transitions out of settler colonialism because we've conquered the continent. And then we kill a ton of Hawaiians as well, mainly through disease and other thing. But then in the Spanish-American War, like our first real move overseas as an empire, we do it to a degree in the Philippines. We kill millions of Filipinos. It's brutal, it's bloody, it's ugly. And I think what happens, though, as the decades go on, is we end up having an educated middle class in the U.S.
And
that
the
has access.
Truman Doctrine and
that has access to what's going on overseas. And we do it again in Vietnam. We kill 4 million Vietnamese. We kill however many millions of Cambodians and Laotians. And the educated middle class in the United States, I think, eventually rebels. They say this is not worth it. And so I don't think it's possible for Western countries, because, again, they don't have the will, the constituency isn't there that wants it, to do the type of subjugation you're talking about. You need a ton of resources. The Soviets tried it in Afghanistan to subjugate the Afghans, and it didn't work. And they broke themselves doing it. I mean, that whole thing of there's a lot of reasons for the Soviets' collapse, but I think part of it was all those Soviet kids coming home in body bags. That just rips apart the interior fabric of the body politic there in the Soviet Union in the 80s. But so I think there's a lot to this that ties into this idea of settler colonialism and what's at stake. And going back to the first thing we were talking about these terror groups and what they're trying to achieve, and are they terrorists or are they freedom fighters? And again, an inherently subjective kind of thing.
And to be fair, I always wanted to go to Australia, so I don't have a problem with Australia, Kym.
I know that.
That was like the when I was growing up as a kid, that was like my ultimate goal, was to go to Australia at some point.
You're gonna quickly down.
No, I wanted to go hang out with Crocodile Dundee, man.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we all thought Australia was like. We all thought you all carried big knives.
That's not a knife. This is a knife.
Way up north. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I've always wanted to go there. I've always been obsessed with nature, which was like what's been so cool about being married to Beatrix and getting to go to South Africa, see Kruger National Park and stuff like that. So Australia was like right up there with one of the like most like uninhabited places. Like y'all have some of the like the greatest like countryside in the world there in Australia. So I'd love to go there.
Also, back to what Matt was just saying as well. Like,
I wanted to talk about colonizing kangaroos now. Like that's where I was going.
We can talk about that.
Sorry. All right.
We can talk about
back on topic.
We can talk about when the Australian government went to war against emus. But with that as well, like with the so say the Aboriginals here in Australia, they were defeated. And every time there was in the United States, same with all the native peoples, were defeated. Every treaty, every promise was betrayed, like consistently, up until I was listening to Russell Means in his 1988 Senate hearing recently, because I was talking to some Aboriginal Australians here, because it very resonates. It's always like the federal government creates a body, and then it oversees them, the Palestinian Authority, if you will. They collaborate. It gives the auspices that the indigenous people have autonomy, that they have this and they have that. Really, they're just got a puppet proxy. Everything's horrible. And then what happens is you have the Wounded Knee 1973, you have the Aboriginal rights movement. They fight back, they take hostages. And in doing something that is violent, they push back against the goons, against the tribal police, against the federal government itself. They push back. But if they don't do that, they go silently into that good night, or they just disappear. Do you feel that places like Hamas, and because of like a lot of left-wing ideology that comes through the 1970s, like with Fatah and then Hamas being more jihadist, that they see a history of the United States' foreign interventions, a history of Australia and the United States itself, that if they don't fight, and if they don't fight with tooth and nail and absolutely vicious, whether they're right or wrong, that they will disappear, that they literally have their backs to the wall, they're like a caged animal, and they have to fight and be completely horrible, even if it's to provoke a global war, because then it's or not a global war, regional war. It's going to create a situation where Israel can't fight Hezbollah and Hamas at the same time. They can't continue to bomb Syria. The United States can't even manufacture enough ammunition for Ukraine. Logistically, everyone knows logistically the United States is deficit now. So anyone that's observing thinks, you know what, we can probably, this right now is the best time in human history for us to make a point. and that's why they can provoke these horrible attacks. And once again, use innocent human beings as pawns. It's freaking horrible.
Yeah, I think that's the dilemma, right? That they face, in the sense of die slowly with no one paying attention, or die violently and be condemned as terrorists, right?
Yeah.
That's their choices, it seemed like. And yeah, and this is what happens when you don't offer them another choice, when you have no political process, when you have these Abraham Accords and this current ongoing process of trying to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia and Israel, and the Palestinians are completely cut out of that. They see no opportunity other than a violent track. So I think there's a lot of reasons, I think, for what Hamas did a week and a half ago. But I think one of those reasons is that they said, we're not going to be ignored. We will not be ignored. You're going to try and create these deals between Israel and all these countries. You're going to normalize things between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and you're going to ignore us and leave us out. We're not going to allow that to happen. And then the idea of the larger regional war. I don't know how. I agree with you, Kym, in the sense that logistically, we're, as we say, we're out of Schlitz, we're running out of stuff, and that's going to change. I mean, the amount of money we're going to put into our defense industry in these next years is going to be disgusting. It's going to be obscene, and it's coming because no one. Oh, well, there'll be some in Congress who vote against it, but they'll get in our House. They'll get 300 votes a year for $1 trillion or 1.2 trillion, 1.3 trillion. You just had the outgoing chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the guy who just left, Mark Milley. He thought that it's possible to see the U.S. defense budget double in a few years, in a couple of years. Right. And so we'll just build the factories to manufacture those 155 shells. Right. And at 155 shells for everybody. I mean, so I think the timing too is something there, but yeah, you're absolutely right, because what are the choices they have?
Well, even Australia, we're becoming a massive defense manufacturer as well. Just like different systems too, like, guidance systems, the Bushmaster famously, and other things like that. And we've got all of these foreign companies, like we've got Swedish arms manufacturers, we've got British Aerospace Australia, and they are pumping out the biggest jobs programs here in Australia is going to be defense. So like military weapon systems. And we're going to build our own submarines under the AUKUS that change, but all of those people, they're going to get switched to other areas now. They're going to pivot. They're going to change their skills, and they're going to be developing other weapon systems, and that's going to be used in doing stuff for one of my friends was working for a certain company, and he said the Ukraine war was the best thing for him to get an Audi. Like, what I mean? Like, because he got paid bonuses. They're getting obscene, and all ex-military servicemen, Australia has a surplus of them, are going into these defense industries, and they're becoming contractors. And like, we have an industrial military complex here in Australia that's not as big as the United States, but it's growing. And this war will definitely be something that will push it.
We say here in the U.S., that rebuilding wasn't successful in Iraq or Afghanistan, but Northern Virginia and Maryland. Oh my gosh. So to give you an example, Kym, Tommy probably knows this. The wealthiest part of the United States is Washington, D.C., or the D.C. suburbs.
Isn't it?
And if you go back,
isn't it like it's like 3 or 4 counties around DC or something like that?
Depending upon the article you read, or whoever, Money Magazine says this, Forbes says that, so 1/6 of 9 or 3 of 5, but it's clear. And if you go back, it was never that way. You go back before 9/11, it was Silicon Valley, it was New York, it was Tulsa and Dallas because of the oil and gas, places that produced something, that had some that actually mattered, that did something of substance. DC, of course, just takes and then redistributes. And you see that, though, then you go and you say, okay, well, maybe it's the entire federal budget. And it's not, because since 2001, the federal budget, with aside from national security, military, defense-related stuff, has either stayed flat or has actually decreased, even as we've gained 50 million people in this country. So it almost all comes from these war budgets we've had, and you just see the entire region in DC transformed. And a number of people who have second homes, to your point, this is why I got running on this tangent about Audis, the number of people driving Audis and Mercedes and BMWs and Lexuses who owe that to the military industrial complex throughout DC. It's massive. We had, when I was there doing that kind of stuff in 2008, so this goes about 15 years now, if you had a secret clearance and you knew Microsoft Office, you could get a job making $80,000 a year. Right. Those are the two qualifications that you had. That was like basically, I mean, that's what it was like. And so if you had any other experience, anything else to bring in, you had a top secret clearance, you're making at least $150,000, $160,000 a year. I mean, that's how it was. Whole industry, it just blossoms and it transforms that whole area. So it's just amazing what it looks like now compared to 20 years ago. And it looks like the wealthiest part of the United States. And it reminds people, I think, of the capital city in the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that, right? I mean, yeah. And so God help you all in Australia, because you guys have, I know you all have your own military industrial complex that's blossoming. But what's scary is you're seeing that throughout the world. The Chinese have a military industrial complex now in the way they didn't have one before. Russia is just, I mean, their defense industry is they're doubling the amount they're putting into it. India as well. I mean, and certainly all the NATO countries. Yeah, I mean, that's all we're going to do throughout the world is have these hollow economies based upon a militarist economic system.
So y'all want to hear one of the funniest things I've heard this week? The right is all about arming yourself just in case you have to take on the government, right? And one of the things that I've heard coming out of the conservatives, out of the right, if you disarm Palestine, you have peace. But if you disarm the Jews, the Palestinians will wipe them off the map. Well, wait, why is the right talking about disarming anybody? Don't we have the right to bear arms to fight off an oppressive government? So if the government of Israel, which that the entire history there is very complicated, and I understand there's a lot of complications, and I understand what happened in 1948, and I understand all of these different things. But if we're talking about disarming people in order to create peace, you sound no different than the progressives. You sound no different than the left. And it's just mind-boggling that the people that another thing they were saying earlier on is, oh, well, Ukraine, funding Ukraine is just a concoction of the weapons manufacturers, and it's just so the weapons manufacturers will get richer. But as soon as this happened, Hamas attacked Israel, and it's like, oh, we got to fund Israel. And they don't think of the propaganda that the weapons manufacturers have been pushing for 40 years about Iran, because now they're like, we got to bomb Iran. We got to bomb Iran. They all sound like John McCain, bomb, 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 bomb Iran, and it's like, okay. Michael Malice has this saying, the right is just the left going the speed limit, right? So the left is pushing the agenda and the right is just kind of following along at a slower pace. It's like, hold on, we'll get there, just slow it down. And what my point, whenever I was saying earlier about the difference between an empire and a republic, it's like, no, man, like, we actually have to take the ideas that were to form the American government, and we actually have to play off of those ideas, and we have to get rid of the empire altogether. The empire is the problem. That whole authoritarianism, that whole idea that we can control other people, that's the issue. Like the issue isn't that we can't be a shining beacon on the hill, right? It's that we're not. Like, yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Two things. When it comes to American republicanism and that, but also the concept of Western civilization, there is the platitudes, there is the ideals of some writers, like because the social contract is a Western civilized concept as much as free market economics.
Social contracts bullshit too. I never.
Yeah, I know, but you're choosing that to be bullshit. You also say Marxism is also a Western civilization concept.
Yeah, it is.
Central banking is a Western civilization concept. Like pogroms of a certain nature. All of these things, these negatives, carpet bombing, and like total war theory of Western civilization. So people that are in the Orient or outside of the Occidental world, they see the West as being that. And so the rest of the world sees American republicanism as being manifest destiny, um, what they did to Hawaii, what they did to the Philippines, all of that, what they did to South America for banana companies and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
That is, so all of that is what the rest of the world sees. But Americans, they don't look in the mirror. They look outside and think, oh, we built this. This is the best thing in the human history. It doesn't matter that we killed 500,000 Laotians for no reason other than we had a heap of bombs. They don't see that, but the rest of the world sees that. And that's the discourse. That's the diametric world. And the same thing to go back with Israel and Palestine is, do you feel that sometimes American partisan politics, like left and right, is different to the United States as it is, say, in Australia? But American conversation is infecting Australian politics. So, but left and right, the definition, what is the definition of left and what is the definition of right? To me, the understanding of that going back to the 19th century is different to what it is now.
Yeah, the French Revolution, it was
like most people can't tell me what left and right is. Like, what is left and right? Like, is right economic protectionism? Is it theocracy? Is it a big, strong national defense? Is it, you know what I mean? Like, what is right and what is left? And what happens is,
personally, I think this is the way it works. And Matt can correct me if he thinks I'm wrong. I think you have to divide the left and right into two hemispheres, right? So I would say Matt would admit to being left and I would admit to being right. Okay. But we are not authoritarian at all. Neither of us are. Right. So Matt, like he'll joke with me and he'll be like, oh, I'm your favorite communist, and we joke around because like we're friends and we have this good relationship. But there's an authoritarian right and there's an authoritarian left too. So typically whenever I say left, I'm speaking authoritarian. And I would guarantee you more than likely when he would say right in a pejorative fashion, he's speaking authoritarian right. Like, because there is that. And there are these people that like a Nikki Haley would be authoritarian right. Right.
That's exactly who I was just going to say. Yeah, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis. Yeah, exactly. They're not. Yeah.
And then you would have somebody, I like an AOC would be authoritarian left. She's a psycho. I don't care what anybody says. That woman is nuts. She's like Nancy Pelosi with left like policies. She's a nutcase. And so that's when Matt or I are speaking to each other and we're speaking left or right, I would say typically that's what we're talking about.
You're basing that on personalities rather than ideologies, because
I'm basing it off of authoritarianism. So the feeling that I can force everybody else around me to live the way I want them to live that's a different story than saying I'm right on the spectrum, like full free market capitalism, Rothbardian right, and Matt is full left, right? Like it's like we would never like try to impose our own ideas on each other.
Right. I think for me, it's you have that split between left and right in the sense that Tommy was describing of how our media has constructed it, how our political system has developed it and enshrined it. But I think when you get into like this conversation, for me, left is, put simply, big government, right is small government. Left is work together, right is individuals. So I mean, really dumbing it down, making it very overly simple. But
I would disagree with that, because I would say you don't have the opportunity to work together if your government's too big.
Well, I mean, in the sense of, I think you're right. Exactly. We can go down this path, but certainly I think what's useful though is that what's useful for the establishment, for those in power and for those institutions that
maybe I would be better off saying it that way. Maybe I'd be better off using that language.
Is the idea though that this left right binary system divides people and it separates people, and it's easy to manage. And this is why I think a two-party system is so dangerous, because it just sets everything up as us versus them. It just uses the other so well. You have these percentages of Democrats who view Republicans as evil, something like 40%. And Republicans, about the same thing, 40% view Democrats as evil. When you're talking about that, when you use that type of language, how could there ever be any compromise? How can there ever be any negotiation? How can there ever be any discussion? And that's great if you're trying to manage it for your own benefit, if you are the established institutions, if you're the powers that be, however you want to describe it. This is why I'm so much in favor of a multi-party democracy, because it's harder to control and manipulate. But I do agree with Tommy's phrasing, though, of authoritarians, because you do see that in both the left and the right. And that's what I think really dominates both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party as it exists in American national politics, or is a degree of authoritarianism on both sides, because they will bend the knee so quickly, whether it's with surveillance, whether it's with big tech, whether it's with law enforcement, whether it's with the military. They will, even things, you can have, the border wall down in Texas, and Biden's border policies are no different than what Trump's are. You can pick out things, but they are pretty much the same. And Biden just waived 30 environmental regulations to continue building the wall. You'll see how quickly they will bend to that type of policy, because they feel it benefits them. So they abandon any type of ideology or philosophy they have.
I was also going to say, do you feel that part of the problem is that the rest of the world has to constantly translate American political language in their mind? Because, you defined right wing being little government, which is not true for a lot of the world. That's not the reality, right? And left wing being big government, that's not true either. That's against American. That's American party politics. The Democrats always, but the Republicans consistently grow the government. The conservatives.
That's why I tried to say
no.
There's right wing authoritarian.
That's what I mean. That's where that confusion is. But the other thing is, like, the rest of the world, even in Gaza or Israel, they have to constantly. They're at the subject of a U.S. party structure.
I think the problem is that the rest of the world, even has to be worried about what America is doing. I think that's the problem.
We literally are.
Because I think that's the big issue. I think in an ideal situation, whenever I talk about like the republic, or like what a republic is supposed to be from the Ron Paul standpoint, like I was saying earlier, the rest of the world would never even have to know what the hell we were doing. It would not be the rest of the world's problem. The problem is that America became an empire and started this unilateral world government. And this is why we have a war with Russia. This is why there are these things happening. And so that unilateral world government has forced authoritarianism down the throats of the rest of the world, trying to create a hegemonic world that fits in with American standards. And we're not all Americans, man. Sorry, that's not the way the world works.
Right. Yeah, I think that's why if people haven't read Gore Vidal's novels on the American Empire, his Empire series, I don't think it starts off that way when he's writing them. I think he just wanted to write a series of historical novels, but it certainly heads that way, and that's what he ends up calling it. But there's a novel. One of the novels is Hollywood. That's such a key part of the American Empire is Hollywood, so that we can disseminate and control how others speak, how others view things, right? Others' perception. And you're right, Kym. We've got this political system that everyone else is forced to listen to follow, to understand, to mimic, what have you. And yeah, it really makes no sense.
Well, America's in a proxy war with North Korea right now. Do you know how that proxy war is being fought? They're sneaking in old soap operas, American jeans, and makeup across the South Korean border into North Korea to teach the women of North Korea to be more American.
Blue jeans versus the Soviet Union, sort of.
Yeah, the blue jeans in the Soviet Union. Yeah, and this is what America has done, constantly trying to push culture. Because who was it that said politics is downstream from culture. And Andrew Breitbart said that. And
Yeah, I
so
remember.
the American goal is to push the American culture into Iran, into Saudi Arabia, into all these places, and get like this liberation of all these people so that they are more like America, so that the American hegemony can continue running.
I remember being in Brunei in 2001, the spring of 2001, and we're walking, and there's this big mosque there, and this woman is walking ahead of us, and she's covered, and her son is walking next to her in a Kobe Bryant jersey. And I remember just thinking at the time that friction is going to cause problems, can cause problems, particularly if it's something that the interest in Kobe Bryant and the Lakers is something that is not forced upon them. That's one thing, right? But everyone knows that's not the case. We force our culture, we force ourselves in so many ways. And yeah, of course, people can be basketball fans, but that image struck me, that Lakers jersey, right next to the mother who is covered in front of the mosque. It just was so. It just
There's
really,
such a
I felt like
contrast.
contrast. Yeah, exactly. And it didn't have to be. I think that's what's so terrible is it doesn't have to be. You could have these, right? You know, it doesn't have to be, but because of the force and the nature of who we are as Americans, we make it a problem.
I heard one time. I'm sorry, Kym. I just
no, you're fine. You're fine.
I heard one time that they would print off the Super Bowl winning shirts, right? So it was like, let's say, I don't even remember what year it was, but let's say it was Rams versus Steelers this year. I don't know if that was ever a Super Bowl. I quit watching football a long time ago. But let's say that the Steelers won the Super Bowl. They would take all the shirts that said Rams Super Bowl victors, and they would ship them overseas.
Right.
To foreign countries, and that is pushing that American idea. Like, American football isn't a thing anywhere else. Like nobody gives a shit. I live in America. I don't give a shit about it. Like, nobody fucking cares about it. But they would do that, and that was just part of it. And then if you watch a football game, you watch a basketball game, you're guaranteed to have at least one advertisement by Boeing. You would have like some salute the troops moment where the troops like, oh, the military is so great, and it's like, all right, like, it's all propaganda now, all of it, for us, overseas, everywhere. It's all propaganda. It's all run and funded through these ad companies, these international corporations, pushing this American hegemony that freaking Zbigniew Brzezinski was pushing back in the 70s. It's all the same.
Sums up Independence Day when Bill Pullman, the president, does his speech, and then there's some British pilots, and it's like, it's the Americans have got a plan about bloody time. It's like the rest of the world can't do anything on their own. If it wasn't for that one and powerful speech, and we're going to gang up and fire F-18s, that's the mentality.
Yeah.
But that shows the success of neocolonialism, right? So we go back to what we were talking before about how settler colonialism works, the need to use subjugation and to exterminate in order for it to be successful, and maybe, and then the problems with having a population willing to do that. Do you really want it that badly? And here's the modern way of doing it, right? And one of it is to buy culture. We haven't even talked about finance, right? And the banks and everything else, and that type of, which is the whole goal of it all, right?
Yeah,
is that extraction.
That gets
that's like, a whole other. That's a whole other
like
episode.
CBDCs and the BRICS nations and all that's going on there.
And I don't know how it is in Australia, Kym, but the colossal freaking out right now that China is loaning money to other nations is amazing, and it really boils down to that was our thing. They're taking it from us. We were the ones that are extracting so much from the developing world. Who are they to come in and take our racket? Well,
I think China's idea was like, well, we own like half their debt, so we might as well just take the freaking loans too.
I mean, perfect example is say, Matt, you've got in the background like Julian Assange. Julian Assange encapsulates it perfectly because he's an Aussie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
right.
we got like we, the collective we, but the Australian government has no power whatsoever in that situation. And even US law, under the Sedition Act or whatever it was that they're going to get all this sort of stuff is setting a dangerous precedent. And it's a short-term goal, a partisan goal, if you will, but it's a short-term goal. But if it goes ahead and he gets locked up and he gets punished under US law, well, what if China does that against a dissident living in wherever, an Indian? Because the precedent gets set, and then it's frightening because that means I could be writing something here in Australia about the United States government or about the Chinese government, and then randomly I get abducted in a third-party nation, and there is nothing that can be done because and that's one of the unintended consequences. But the principle of the matter, like we're constantly told here in Australia we don't have a First Amendment, we have defamation laws and things like that. So freedom of speech is not the same as the United States. The United States has a First Amendment, and still, like what I mean. Julian Assange,
we still have to fight constantly.
Yeah, it's totally dark.
It's nuts. It's crazy. There's no reason.
And there's no guarantee that our Supreme Court, this court, is going to protect it either. That's what's so dangerous, is that the current court, I don't think, will protect it in the way that previous courts might have or would have. This court is so disposed to the national security prerogative of the government that I'm afraid that they won't. But it's true, though. We have this system where, yeah, Kym, you say the wrong thing and then you end up in the wrong place. And we probably wouldn't, the U.S. probably wouldn't kidnap you in Australia because we wouldn't want to offend the Australian government too much. But if you're bad enough, we'd figure a way to get you. I mean, like, we wait till you go to Bali for a vacation or something like that.
Exactly.
What I was going to say is it's hard enough to protect our own citizens, like, right? So you had like Bill Binney, Thomas Drake, who was the CIA guy that exposed John Kiriakou. Like they've tried to get our guys too. Like the only reason that Julian Assange is in danger is because he's not an American citizen. That's what's allowed the American government to do this to him, and it's terrible. It's horrible. What's happening?
Him staying in legal limbo like this is punishment anyway. Like
well, for 7 years he was in an embassy.
But what sums up, and this is where being like the term anarchist can really come into play, is what really sums up, say, the Julian Assange situation is when he was in English prison, it was the prisoners who went on strike that got him out of solitary confinement, not all of the best lawyers in the world, not Amnesty International, not all of these agencies, all these media outlets, not even the British defense and all that. It was the prisoners, the worst prisoners in the United Kingdom, who said, we're going on strike, and they got Assange out of that so he could get visits. And that's insanity.
Right.
Like, that sums up how much of a facade due process is, the whole legal system is, all these rules written up in legalese. It means nothing. It's meaningless. It's like it's just something to impose upon others. And what you're talking about, the whistleblowers like John Kiriakou and stuff like that in the United States, we have that here in Australia. Like we have the Afghan war crimes. We have like a Australian tax office whistleblowers. There was ASIO was spying on the East Timorese government so that it could give preferential information to Australian corporations. And an ASIO person leaked that information and was a whistleblower about it. All of these people are facing secret tribunals and secret courts, and there's no there's no grounds of them to actually get good representation, or like the defense team, I can't remember which case it was, but the legal defense team on one of the individuals was also facing prosecution for defending him. Like, how insane is that? That is, like, Australia goes around and talks about how we're like, rules-based order, and we're a liberal democracy, blah, blah, rule of law. But at the end of the day, when it comes to things like that, none of that matters. It's just meaningless. Like, there was an incident where the Australian Federal Police went overseas, went to Thailand, purchased some heroin, brought it back to Australia, then tried selling to some Australian drug dealers and try to set them up. The magistrates here in South Australia wouldn't prosecute because it was an entrapment sort of thing, which can happen in Australia. And they continued to do it until they got a judge that would do it. And then that person was arrested, even though he didn't purchase it. He was just in the proximity to this thing that the Australian Federal Police had illegally purchased from another nation and brought it into Australia. These things happen all the time, and it doesn't matter because law, the Crown always wins. The Crown always wins. Like, and
Well, and then you see, right, the whole structure of empire where we get Britain to do our bidding. And when your PM comes here next week,
yep.
and he has said, Albanese has said that he will speak to Biden about Julian Assange. But do you think he's going to say, if you don't let Julian Assange go, I'm not going to buy your submarines?
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
he'll say one sentence probably, bring it up so he honors that commitment half-heartedly, and that'll be it probably.
And that's if Albanese is still prime minister in 6 weeks' time, because Australia has a history of coups, like peaceful coups. And we've just had a referendum here in Australia that went terribly for the prime minister. So he can have a leadership change, and it will be some unelected, or it'll be a minister, but the process will be unelected as far as the Australian populace goes. And I guarantee, like every other coup in Australian history, the British government and the United States government finds out who the new leader is before the Australian public does.
Right.
And that is the pattern. That is the pattern of Australia. And like you look up Australian coups, how many coups we've had since 1975. They're all peaceful because the Australian public's like, oh, whatever, it doesn't matter. And that's just the pattern. That is the pattern of Australia.
It's and then the other thing too, you guys touched upon with Assange, and I have to get going in a couple minutes, unfortunately. But like,
yeah, I was
this
about
idea
to ask you about that.
Yeah, I think the U.S. government with Assange, they really want him to die in prison. They don't want to bring him over here. They're as much as I said that they would probably win in the Supreme Court, they might not. They don't want to risk that. But if he dies in prison, what a victory for them, because
that's as good as any execution.
It's better, right? Because that then puts the fear into everybody, because it was never resolved. Right. It was never what they were doing was never struck down, so they can do it again. Right. They'll do to you what they did to Julian. They will push you into exile. They will force you to live under house arrest, and then they will throw you into solitary until you develop a mental illness. Right. And then you'll kill yourself. That's what they will do, and that effect it has on journalists. Let alone just people who want to exercise their First Amendment rights, is really chilling. It's horrifying.
It's dystopian.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It is.
Well, I know you got to go, Matt. And I was trying to keep track of the time, but this conversation was just so much fun. I was having troubles. Cool. What do you got to plug? What are you doing right now?
Oh, so I work for an organization called
there's one of the puppies.
This is Alex. Give hugs and kisses to yours, please.
I can't let them in while I'm on the podcast. They'll have me in the corner, like.
Oh yeah, no, they're usually pretty. They're usually pretty good. This one here sometimes gets antsy and gets anxious, and we'll sometimes make sure we know he's present. But no, I work for the Eisenhower Media Network, so collection of former national security types, military, diplomats, intelligence, arguing for all the things we were talking about here tonight.
How's your work with PTSD going? I know you were doing a lot with that.
Yeah, I mean, but personally, things are good. Traumatic brain injury stuff I've been working with a herbalist actually, and had a lot of great success. Also had some success with some medicine, so things are great on that end, or better. So thank you for asking. And then in terms of generally working with other vets, yeah, it's the same. It's the constant slog. You'll see some guys will get better, some guys will get worse. You'll meet new guys. It's just, we had 2.7 million over there in those wars, and there's just so many. And the willingness of American society to honestly take it on, right? The willingness of the VA to take on, hey, what's the reason why veterans are killing themselves at rates so much higher than everybody else? The reason is because they went over to Iraq and Afghanistan and did things they regret, did things that they're incredibly guilty for. They feel incredibly guilty for, then they feel betrayed and everything else. And that type of moral injury is why they're putting pistols in their mouth and blowing the back of their head off. As well as in all the substance abuse stuff, the traumatic brain injury stuff. And we're starting to see more of the, just talking to a few people who are involved in this kind of work, you're starting to see more of the toxic legacies. So you're starting to see more of the burn pit exposure issues. Thankfully they passed that into Congress, and so guys can get in for help with that. But you're seeing these respiratory illnesses and these really start to develop. A friend of mine who works at a veteran who runs veteran cemeteries for the state of Virginia, he sees that a lot. He sees all the guys that are coming in, and he sees that type of keeps showing up. So yeah. But I appreciate you asking, man. Thank you.
Well, I know there's been around 30,000 that have committed suicide to date, if not more.
Yeah, it's hard. There was just a really scary study out of I think it was University of Alabama, University of Georgia last year, that says it's possible we're undercounting by half how many veteran suicides, because the way we capture what's a suicide. Look, if some vet is going 100 miles an hour and crashes into a bridge abutment, how do we know whether it was an accident or suicide?
Right.
I mean, you see that, and there's actually, now I'm blanking on it, there was a phrase for it after Vietnam about these single car accidents where, guys would get into these single car accidents, they get killed. There weren't beer cans, in the seat next to them or anything like that, but it gets labeled as a single car accident and written off that way. So yeah, I mean, we don't know. There was 1 year in 2014, the VA did publish publicly data on this, where they looked at the rates of suicide among Iraq and Afghan veterans, and those numbers were off the charts. It's the rate of suicide for veterans in general is 1.5 times the civilian population. For Iraq and Afghan vets, adjusted for age and sex, it's 6 to 10 times civilian population, right? So some kid who went to Iraq, some kid who went to Afghanistan, he's got his chances of blowing his brains out are 6 to 10 times higher than the kids he went to high school with, So, and they published that once 9 years ago now.
Right.
And, so because it's so politically inconvenient to be like, why are these veterans killing themselves? Well, because they're ashamed of what they did in Iraq, because they were betrayed by our government, and they came home and they were broken because of that. And that's a very real thing. It's I went through that, whether it's traumatic brain injury or other things I would take that stuff any day of the week over the moral injury. Absolutely. But yeah, let me get going. Hey, I appreciate this, guys.
But thanks for all you do, man.
Take care. Look after yourself, mate.
Yeah, you all take care. Have a good night.
All right, buddy. All right. So moving on. You have a little bit of time?
I sure do.
All right. So we're gonna go ahead and do a second podcast here. We're just gonna cut it off and we're gonna start a new one.
That sounds good.
So one of the things that's always on my mind is that I look at men today, and especially young men, and the lack of direction they have, the lack of purpose they have. You found something in MMA that gave you something special. And this is something we talked about having a conversation about months ago, and we just never got around to it. So we're going to do it now. The discipline that you found, like, what was it about MMA that like really gripped you?
First of all, I wanted to learn how to fight properly. So it was no holds barred back then. And so I, grew up watching a lot of martial art movies, watching lots of boxing and things like that. And so I thought that a man should have the ability to protect and defend and fight. So it was more of a philosophical decision, so that I would, have the physical capabilities to fight another person, learn how to be an army man. That's why I joined Army Cadets and enlisted at a young age, all that sort of stuff. But then also you should be like a warrior scholar. So you should read, Stoicism, Taoism, things like that, Zen, and read different classical literature. So it's both a cerebral and a physical thing. So that's what I felt. And then it was that there was a degree of
so like a Renaissance man kind of.
Yeah, well, being a Renaissance man back then, in my mind, was a good thing.
Right.
But now it turns out that you're kind of an outlier, and people don't know how, like, say for example, someone finds out that I do writing, like writing fiction and nonfiction, and then also as a professional fighter, they can't imagine that those two worlds go together. And yeah, as you know, like a lot of fighters, we're like nerds. Like we want to talk about, other things, and fighting is just a manifestation of that, philosophical concept, that journey, if you will. But I got into fighting
Well,
because I wanted.
I'm sorry, like you're problem solvers,
Yes, and
and
it's
so you do it in real time.
well, yeah, exactly. Fighting is a physical puzzle. Like, say, when I was younger, I'd go around to different martial art clubs and do challenge matches like the Gracie Challenge, and not in a disrespectful manner. Just you challenge a black belt, you stomp, you shoot in, you take him to the ground, get an arm lock or something like that, and it's because you feel that that's what you should do to prove what you're doing works, rather than taking it on face value. Like, oh, grandmaster whatever said this block will break an arm or whatever else. So the progress from MMA to MMA from that was natural, because you start contacting, through the 1990s, I'd start contacting martial art promoters and fight show promoters trying to get gigs, until eventually one of them gives you one, and you just suddenly become a professional fighter without a coach, without a gym, without without training partners. That all comes second. But that's how it was done back then, well, at least for me. And then you suddenly have a group of people that form around you, because they're also attracted, because they see on the internet forums, hey, there's a guy in Adelaide that's doing this cage fighting, or this person was. So that's how it comes about. But yeah, you're right, it's a physical puzzle. Like, and the discipline, you do attach masculinity to it. But having trained with a lot of female fighters, I don't feel that playing a sport is exclusively masculine, if that makes sense. So you
It
and I
does
both
to a
understand.
point, but I have an issue with women getting hit.
Yeah, I
So
know that. I know that.
I just
Okay.
can't stand it, man. I can't
Full
stand watching a woman hit a woman. I can't
I
stand a
know.
man hitting a woman. I can't stand it.
I know. And you know what? I don't like watching girls beat the crap out of each other either. Like,
Yeah.
I can watch
It's
ladies
just
wrestling.
uncomfortable. It's just like,
Yeah.
wait.
Especially the after, when they're all battered and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, that's the
But
word.
like, but with wrestling, like, say one of my friends, she's an Olympic level wrestler. I can watch her compete and train, because I don't feel it's a tough sport, like a really tough sport, and she's really driven in that. She's very feminine, but she's very capable. But I don't think she'd ever do MMA, and I
Yeah,
wouldn't
like
want to
I can
watch
watch
her.
female jujitsu, like no issue. But
Yeah,
I don't want to watch Chris Cyborg beat up on a woman.
neither do I.
I just don't. It
And you know
doesn't
what?
do anything for me. I will not watch it. I'll just like, okay, I like that's going on now. I'm gonna go do this. I'll come back for the next fight.
And you know what's worse is, one, having to spar ladies. Like, you're just touching, you're condescendingly sparring them, even if they're talented.
Mm.
Or when you have to corner a lady, and so you've got this girl that you've helped prepare, and she's getting there having a kickboxing fight, and she's coming back. She's got bruises on her. She's bloody nose. Her eyes are glassed over. Everything that you don't want to see in a lady, like in a woman, because it sort of fights with your certain instincts to
Yeah,
protect her.
because your instinct now is like, I have to defend her.
Yeah, yeah. I want to throw in the towel, or you're objective. At least for me, objectively, the advice you give her is different than what it would be for, say, a guy that I coach.
Mm.
I'm still concerned for them, but I might get him to be more aggressive. Whereas I found in the past with ladies, not that I've had to coach many of them, but when you're coaching a lady, you objectively want her to be more secure. So you're going to give her more, at least me, give her defensive advice, like, cover up, hit your jab, move, as opposed to get in there, hit that left hook, show those knees. You don't want to be as aggressive, because you don't want to take those
Right.
risks.
Yeah,
So
you don't want her to run into a knee or something. Yeah.
yeah. Objectively, it's a different mentality.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so I am very sexist like that in that
Yeah,
regard
this
too.
is probably this is probably not where I wanted to go with this conversation.
No.
But this is so interesting because like I always like I listen to some of these, like I'll listen to like, well, Ray Longo and Eric Nixick, I've never heard them talk about coaching women. So, but I've heard some men coaches talk about, oh, she's a badass. And I'm like, yeah, but dude, how do you let her do that? Like, I'd be like, look, you're a badass, but I love you. I'm not going to let you kill yourself.
Yeah.
Like there's something about it, like as being a man, that I'm like, yeah, I don't want you to get hurt.
Do you know what's also tough? Sometimes training with your missus. So if you're training with your partner, like say my ex, for example, and if say her goal was not to play a sport, but was say self-defense, for example, you can be really tough on them because you really want them to accomplish their goal. So you can be really hard on them. You're not going to like bash them up or anything like that, but
Right.
you can be a real tough disciplinarian and push them harder than you would someone else because you're emotionally invested in them and you want her to be able to defend herself despite you being present. Because as a man, you feel like you got to protect, but objectively, as a self-defense coach or even as a partner, you shouldn't have to be there all the time. You want them to be weaponized. You want them to be like a Wolverine or something like that, a Banshee. So
I had a situation like that with Beatrix.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because she was telling me, she was like, oh, nobody could put a rear naked choke on me. And I was like, no, baby, you don't understand. A rear naked choke is not a hard choke. And I could put it on you in 2 seconds. And she's like, no, you couldn't. So I was like, do you want me to? And she was like, yeah. And so I did. And I mean, half a second, she's on her knees crying. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to, I was just trying to show you, like, you don't know what you think you know, you know? And it's like, I'm not even a professional fighter. I've taken, I took jujitsu and basic combat in the military. Like, so it's like, if I can wrap you up like that, like any dude can. Like, it's not that hard. And I'm not a big guy either. I'm a long, lanky guy. I'm like 5'11", 190. Like, I'm not a big dude, you know? So it's like, it's like, if I wrap you up like that, like a guy that's like 6'2", 230, he's going to fuck your world, you know? Like,
but you know, the crazy thing is a lot of people that are not morally sound are still training. Like, a lot of people are doing jiu-jitsu, a lot of martial arts training, like say martial arts versus combat sports are two different things, but a lot of people are doing combat sports to be bullies as well. Like, so, and we've had this conversation about the, you know, like with the sport, how it's going now with personalities that are sort of sizzle and less stake, but it's about, you know, publicity. It's about, you know, it's about entertainment, if you will.
Yeah.
There are people that are not even playing these sports. They're doing it and they're getting these skill sets and they're getting these abilities just to bash people and potentially rape. Because when I was coaching people that had been assaulted, a lot of the incidences that they described, you could tell the person had some training. Like, they knew where to get their hooks in. They knew how to wrist control. They knew how to, you know, do a lot of things. So these people are not, you know, like, you know, moral actors. So there's no, and you've got ladies that are dealing with a man that might outweigh by 20 pounds and might have the masculine strength and the mentality to do horrible things. And they're just being ambushed. It's horrible.
That's terrible.
And some people, like some ladies, oh, you know, I'll just get angry and I'll just hit him in the groin. You know, how many dudes say that as well? Like, if I got in a fight, I'll just lose control and then I'll just see red. It's like, all right.
That's like, I heard one, I was watching Believe You Me one time, and some dude, it might have been a woman. It was somebody asked Michael Bisping, when you're in a fight and you're in a clinch, why don't you just tickle the other person? It was like, yeah, that's not gonna work. Like, I don't like when the adrenaline's pumping like that, like, you're not just gonna tickle somebody.
That being said, I believe they did ban tickling from some jiu-jitsu competitions.
Really?
I have tickle subbed people. I have tickle submitted people in sparring. Like, some people are very subjective to it. Like, it's like under the arm and like, it sounds weird, but some people are subjective. I mean, obviously that's sparring and not fighting, but
right. Yeah, I think like jujitsu, I don't know, maybe you could tell me, because I've never done a jujitsu match. I've just trained jujitsu, so I've never done a jujitsu match. But I would think that going into a XFC fight or a K1 fight versus going into a jujitsu match, different mentality. My guess.
You know, I think it's a different sport. Like,
that's why I'm saying I think it's a different mentality. It's not as barbaric. Like, when you go into K1, you know that dude's about to like try to bash your face in.
You're dealing with ballistics,
right?
You know, like,
and if he gets the opportunity, he's going to bash your face in. He's going to break your elbow and choke you out.
Yeah, or you break your toe on a kick, or you break
Right.
your hand,
And you don't have that with jujitsu. It's not quite as violent. It's a
no,
little
it's the gentle art essentially, but it's more like the grappling aspect is more sophisticated because you look at UFC for example, the
so I
threats.
would well, I guess what I'm saying though is like the tickling, like what we're talking about, may work in
Yes,
jujitsu. It's not going
yeah,
to
yeah,
work in an
yeah.
MMA fight. Like
No,
you're
that's
not
right.
going to go into an MMA fight. This dude's trying to break your face. He's not
Yeah.
going to like laugh at you.
Do you know what I also think it is? It's the physical conditioning. Like, say, when you're getting hit all the time and when you're hitting tackles and all that, you kind of get a little bit more calloused, if you will. Your body's more calloused.
Right. I
So,
can feel that.
like last night, for example, I was doing some drills with one of the guys I coach, and we're kicking each other's legs pretty hard. And that, if you are not conditioned for that, that sort of hurts.
Mm.
But over time, you get developed for that, like say hitting the bag or operating heavy tool, digging trenches and stuff like that. It's the same thing. And so being tickled is a little bit more of a sensitivity related thing. But yeah, mindset is a big factor too.
I saw
Like,
I saw a video yesterday, and this big muscle bound dude is asking Tom Aspinall to leg kick him as hard as he can.
oh, yeah.
And Tom Aspinall's like, dude, you're a nice guy. I'm not going to do that. He's like,
Yeah.
but this guy over here will. And he's like, who's this guy? And he's like, his name's Lewis. He's like, Lewis, how old are you? And the kid's like 9. And he's like, can this kid really hurt me? And he's like, if he does it right and he lands the shin on your thigh just above your knee, it'll hurt. And then he almost laid that big ass dude down.
You get that IT band. Well, then you have Forrest Griffin when he kicked that was it a radio guy podcast or something? He kicked him and he broke his leg.
What? I don't know about that.
Yeah, it was about, I don't know, 10, 15 years.
Forrest Griffin was a wild dude, though.
Yeah, he was. There's also
the missing link.
I know. There's also footage of Pedro Hizzo, one of the best leg kickers in the world in history, and he's kicking someone holding a kick shield, and the guy goes, just flips him like it just exploded.
Man, you know what I found? I always told Beatrix, it's like the craziest thing was Anderson Silva broke his shin on a check by Chris Weidman, and Chris Weidman broke his shin on a check.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that is wild.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just nuts.
Every time I see something like that, I always think to myself, I'm not going to throw leg kicks anymore. Because like it's bad luck. It's maybe there's a fracture in there. It's also sometimes when you put your foot down, it bends it.
Yeah.
Like if you want to see a horrible one, check out Stan Longanides versus Dennis Alexio, kickboxing fight. Alexio goes to check the kick, and when he checks it, it snaps his leg, and he puts his foot down, and it just it's horrible.
It just folds under him.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You think that to yourself is I'm not going to throw any more leg kicks.
Yeah.
I'm not doing leg kicks anymore, all head kicks now.
Yeah. You wonder how Blachowicz has continued all these years. That dude must have shins of steel. Like, because he acts like it doesn't even bother him when somebody kicks his shins. He's like, all right, yeah, like whatever. I'll check everything.
Some people are freaks. Muay Thai guys, really good Muay Thai guys, like they're tough. Like their frames are strong. They just are tough. Like they're physically strong. It's like they're like bendable iron. It's insane. I have a friend, Muay Thai guy, and in one of his fights, he threw a kick, and the person checked, and his shin bone went through his calf muscle. So it went through like that way, and he kept fighting. You know what I mean? Like it's a nutritional horrible sport.
Did you see that Dan Hooker Jalen Turner fight?
No, I haven't seen that one. No.
When Dan Hooker broke his forearm in the first round and ended up winning the fight.
Yeah. I think of
he blocked a high kick.
Yeah.
Jalen Turner threw his high kick and Dan Hooker blocked it and broke his forearm. And he fought the whole fight, all 5 rounds. It was a main event at a fight night, and won the fight. And at the end of the fight, Joe Rogan said, looks like you hurt your arm there. He's like, it's just a scratch. That's a different type of brutal, man. That's a different kind of guy.
It's tough. It's like there's a fatalism you have as a fighter. You in your mindset, you kind of go out there, I'm going to die, and it's for a sport. You just think that, like, I don't care. You know, often this is what my perspective was. You think to yourself, I don't care if I get hurt. I don't care if I die. I just don't want to look bad. I don't want to lose. I
Right.
don't want to lose bad. I want to win. And I would always try not to hurt my opponents. Like, I'd always try to, get them down, just make them tap, whatever. Because I didn't want to be that guy that just brutally bashes some guy. I wanted to do it in a nice way. And it's funny you should mention breaking the forearm, because probably the fight that I regret winning the most was against a Japanese opponent. And I threw a front kick. And I was training at the time to kick the limbs, to break the limbs, like, like just to injure the limbs, because he was a good shooter. So I knew if I tried kicking his body or his head, he'd tackle on it. So I was trying to hit his limbs a lot, like especially his arms, because he kept his arms out a little bit. So I
Right.
threw a front kick and I felt his forearm break and you could hear it, like it's like a snap. And then he falls down, he gets back up and he pulls it up and it was limp. And we got to touch gloves to start again. And I could see it was limp. And I thought, and in my mind, I was like, do I like ignore it? Do I pretend, whatever? Because he's still trying to fight. And then
Right.
I slammed him and dislocated his shoulder and knocked him out. And I thought I killed him, which was a horrible feeling in the world. Because the moment you see a person that you're playing a sport against and they're a serious injury, it's the most horrible feeling in the world.
Yeah.
It's like this guy's done nothing to wrong me, and I've just dislocated his shoulder, broken his forearm, and concussed him in my underwear and his underwear in front of a crowd of 3,000 people for a piece of leather with a thing on it.
Right. Yeah.
Weird feeling.
Yeah. But other than like, because there's a lot of like crazy shit we can talk about the fight game, because there's a lot of craziness into it. But when I watch it, when I look at it, what I'm really looking at is young men. Like, you look at it like a Cameron Simon, who's like 23 years old, just lost his first fight in the UFC this past weekend, against a Christian Rodriguez who didn't make weight, right? So Christian Rodriguez, it was a bantamweight fight at 135. Christian Rodriguez weighed in at 140, and Cameron Simon, like, I'm still gonna fight, and I'll fight catch weight 140. Like, screw it. But he had already weighed in at 135. That, cutting that weight, that discipline that it takes to get down to that weight. And you'll hear everybody say, I mean, I remember listening to Stephen Thompson and talk about not taking this last Michelle Pereira fight because Michelle Pereira missed weight by 4 pounds. And he was like, I've already done that with Darren Till when Darren Till missed weight, and it screwed me. He's like, because that last pound is the hardest. And you got to overcome that. And if you're not willing to take on that battle, then I'm not willing to enter a cage with you. Like, even just preparing yourself for the fight is a lot of discipline, and there's a lot of mentality that goes into it.
Sometimes I think with the weight cutting sort of thing is you good cuts, you have bad cuts. Like,
No. Michelle Pereira should have never been trying to make 170. I just watched him fight last weekend against Petrovsky at 185, and he looked like your buddy Mike from Mexico. Like, he was monster. He knocked Petrovsky out with the first punch. So no, he should have never been trying to fight Wonder Boy.
Sometimes, and sometimes the promotions will push. They go, "Oh, we've got too many guys at 185. We've got too many guys at 170 or whatever." So they'll push fighters in a particular direction as well, like, especially UFC. Not to mention the fighters get it in their head that goes, "Oh, I'm going to be stronger at this weight."
That's what I think it is. They feel like they have a better potential. Like with Christian Rodriguez, he's missed weight several times. The UFC doesn't like you to miss weight. They're going to penalize him, and they would rather him move up to 145 and fight at 145 than keep missing weight at 135. I mean, that's just my experience watching UFC.
And coaching guys or even being with friends that are fighters, sometimes it's hard to get through their mindset that being healthy and walking around in a better way and being better at your craft and sport is sometimes better than focusing on the weight, because most people are focusing in the last 2 weeks, they're generally focusing more on the weight cut than they are fight training. And so everything's about that. And then they believe that, oh, I'm going to be bigger than that person, be stronger than that person. But sometimes I think that's a bit of a deficit in their mindset. And I think it steers them in a certain direction where it becomes an obsession, it becomes a religion. Because you look at a lot of guys that are really talented and great, like whatever the combat sport is, they're often smaller guys. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
or they're guys that climb. They might climb from a smaller weight division up into a heavier weight division, you know, Randy or someone like that. And but I think that sometimes, I'm not speaking for all fighters, but just some people, there's a lack of self-belief, or there's a religious thing that, like, I have to cut weight, I have to be at this weight. And then what happens is when they get in there with that other person, they feel, oh, he's really strong. Well, if your game plan is to match strength with another human being, then you're in the wrong sport. Like, you shouldn't be in there to constantly, because strength is a small part of the fight game. Like, strength and power, like that timing is timing is more frightening to deal with than anything
Speed.
else. But yes, but smart speed.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys aren't working on their rhythm, their balance, and their timing and all that sort of stuff, those fundamentals. Instead, they're smashing out, like, you know, CrossFit videos and flipping tires and hitting iron, because it's easier to train conditioning than it is to train fundamentals and form. And you don't look at an Andy Hoog, for example, in talking about K1 before. You don't look at an Andy Hoog at what, 5'10" and what was he? He was about 190 pounds, 200 pounds maybe, fighting against absolute steroid monsters in the good days of K1. And no one says, gee, I wish he was fighting at 170. You know, or 180. Like, no one's thinking that. They're thinking, no, I love seeing this guy absolutely decimate with his technique and his spirit than anything else. And I think the MMA world is sometimes a little bit too fixated on cutting weight. That's my opinion, at least. And I think with CTE and all these other problems that we're going to face, it's.
Do you think that contributes to the CTE,
massively,
the weight cutting? You think so?
Absolutely.
Like the depletion of the liquid in your brain? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's a big factor.
Because it seems like it seems like a guy that cuts a lot of weight is easier to knock out. Yeah. Because he's got his drier brain, I guess. I don't know how the scientific terms behind
all that fluid around the brain that keeps it, you know, secure is gone. And not to mention, it also increases like hemorrhaging, like bleeds in the brain. I mean, look at boxing, for example. Most of the deaths are at lower weight divisions, despite how much power the heavyweights have. And the heavyweights are often more hydrated. And it is. It's a scary thing. Like, a lot of these guys don't realize that their lifestyle and their sport and training is a big factor, is contributing to their long-term health. And when it comes to CTE, like, you know, I've known guys that will have a weight cut, they'll have a kick fight, they'll get in there, have a Muay Thai or a kickboxing fight, go to war with their opponent, they'll drink alcohol, they'll get injected with tramadol, they won't rehydrate, and boom, they'll do it again next week. You know, it's that mentality of fatalism that fighters sometimes have, where we're only worried about each subsequent fight each weekend, and winning a title or being the best in the world is sort of an abstract, but each little moment is more important. And it kind of, I think it depletes your life in some people's cases.
Oh, I can only imagine. You know, it's really sad when you watch, because I've watched MMA for a long time. I've been watching, I mean, I'm 44 years old. I started watching MMA when I was 14. So that's 30 years I've been watching these guys compete. And there's nothing sadder than seeing a situation where your favorite fighter can no longer compete. But he keeps wanting to get in there, and he's just getting decimated. Like, I've just watched over the last 2 years, Tony Ferguson has lost 6 fights in a row.
Yeah.
And it's, man, and I mean, and he's losing to some monsters, right? Like, he got knocked out by Justin Gaethje. He got knocked out by Michael Chandler. You know, he fought Nate Diaz and got choked out. You know, but I'm like, still, Tony, you're 39 years old. That's 6 fights in a row, dude. Like, what else can your body take? And then you see a few months ago, he flips his truck in Vegas because he was driving drunk. And it's like, man, like, what are you doing to yourself? And it's like, some of these guys, I think you and I were talking about this last night. It's like, some of these guys never find any other way of making any money, of earning a living.
You can't
Yeah,
imagine any other.
they can't
Yeah.
think of another way. It's all they've
You get
ever
to,
known. And now
you
we
get to
got Tony Ferguson coming up, I think in November, fighting Paddy Pimblett, who's
Yeah.
this young up and comer out of Ireland who I think is pretty much overrated. And if Tony Ferguson has a chance to win a fight, it's this one,
But
but I mean,
I think two things that you just said there is one, let's say to be a Tony Ferguson, you're like in the 1% of the 1% of the world in a sport that's very
but I saw
exclusive.
Frankie Edgar do the same shit.
Yeah.
Like I've watched this over and over and over, and I'm like, oh my gosh, just please stop. Because it hurts me to even watch it. I don't want to watch it. It's like you're one of my favorite people in the world. I don't want to watch you get hurt, man.
Yeah. And the same thing, like, boxing is a good example of that as well, is these guys spend so much time in their youth working towards a dream, and part of them still remembers being that young guy. And then they get over the hill, and you don't know when you are over the hill, even if your body's telling you, even if your record's telling you. I think the biggest trouble with UFC, MMA sort of thing is a lot of these top level guys, they don't have a circuit where, like, so say if you're a boxer, right? Let's say you're a Greg Page, right? You become the WBA heavyweight champion of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Get to that level, you lose a couple of fights, then you become a contender, and so you become a feeder, and then you might even go down. You start fighting journeyman, but you're still staying active, so you can still make tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Guys like Jesse Ferguson and all this. MMA doesn't do that. MMA is all about organizations. So if once you are a name in MMA, you are constantly fighting studs. So an MMA fighter, like say you take a Tony Ferguson, he should go back and fight on the undercard against, top 50 guys, top 60 guys, top 80 guys, and work his way up, and then fight a top 10 guy, like what they would do
instead of working his way back down.
Yeah,
I see what you're saying. You know what Hunter Campbell said about that though, when, all right, so who is BJ Penn was fighting somebody. I can't remember who he was about to fight, but Josh Thompson said, Hunter, you know what you're doing, right? Because BJ was like old at this time. This is when he was on his decline. And Hunter goes, I know exactly what I'm doing, but have you seen his contract? I can't justify paying him that kind of money and not fighting him against the top guys. Yeah, so maybe there's something to be said about not signing the 8-fight contracts.
Yeah. But that's once again where MMA isn't a sport, it's a collection of organizations. And we just understand that even though they've got different rule sets, we understand that there's, differences for these different organizations. Whereas boxing, for example, sometimes they might have like a 3 knockdown rule. Sometimes they waive that. There are like subtleties, but boxing is a sport that we understand what it is. And so fighters can be free agents and go for different promotions, and they can have, like, if you were, like, say, we use Tony Ferguson, right? Let's say Tony Ferguson has his first loss at high level. Then he might fight 5 cans or journeyman type fighters. He can learn more about himself and refine himself more in those fights against those unnamed or even faded stars than he would against the top 10 guy. Because that top 10 guy wins, it gives him a false sense of confidence. But if he loses, it's
well, to be fair, the last 2 fights he hasn't been top 10 guys.
No, but what
he,
I'm saying,
he lost to Nate Diaz, who wasn't ranked at the time. Well, I think Nate might have been top 10, but he was on his way out. Everybody knew he was on his way out. And that was actually a weight up. It wasn't even like a legitimate fight. But then he fought Bobby Green the last fight. And Bobby Green ended up getting in a omoplata and choking him out in like the 4th round or 5th round. But he looked okay. See, here's the thing with Tony. He looks good in the first 3 rounds.
Yeah.
But it's like after that, it's like his body's just like, okay, I'm done. And it's like, I think that's your age, dude, because how long have you been fighting 5 rounds?
Yeah.
And so
training for 5-round fights.
Right. And the training's what kills him. I truly believe that. Maybe you'll correct me on that, but it seems to me the training is harder on the body than the fighting is.
Yeah, I think if you do stupid stuff because you think you have to do stupid stuff, like I would do crazy things like I'd put oxygen masks on, and run up hills and then do 2,000 strikes on the heavy bag. And then I was getting like hypoxia, like I was getting like my muscles weren't
Yeah,
recovering
you're
because I
tearing
was,
up joints and shit like that.
yeah, and I'm getting all
Yeah.
these injuries. And I'm like sore. I'm not sleeping because you're overtraining, but you think you've got to do this stuff because you want to win a sports match or a fight. And then, and then you think, all right, well, the UFC guys are doing that, so I want to do that. But so I'm fighting on an Australian regional show against maybe a former UFC fighter or something like that. But then you're fighting to try to be like these guys, but you haven't got to that level yet. So you're burning yourself out before you get there. I see guys that are fighting as amateurs here in Australia. They're fighting 3-minute rounds, not 5-minute rounds as amateurs. Three-minute rounds, so 9-minute fight, right? They're training as if they're fighting 5 fights. You know what I mean? They're training as if they're fighting on a UFC card, and they're doing so much conditioning, and they're in their early 20s, and they're going to risk injury. And the more time they're spending on all that hard conditioning is less time they're spending on shadow boxing. They're not spending on fundamentals. They're not spending on practicing how to hit a heel hook, how to practice a rear naked choke. They're not spending that time and energy on that. Instead, they're trying to balance that level because it's easier to put up a video of Instagram of you smashing the bag and pads or whatever else. And I get it because I've been there and I've done that. But the trouble is, you should be learning your craft and getting better at your craft as you're ascending. So as you're ascending, that's when you should be practicing and getting improving. And then when you get a fight booked, you got 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 weeks, whatever. That's when you hit the conditioning. But to try to be at 100% all the time, you just can't do. Like I don't even have a, and then, but at the same time, that being said, you also have a lot of fighters out there, and UFC guys are bad for it too, some of them, where they only train from fight camp to fight camp. So in between, they let themselves go. They might drink, go on benders and all that,
Yeah.
which is just as bad for the body. So you want to be constantly.
There's a balance. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a balance. And it's really subjective to the individual and your style, your mentality, and all that. Like, using boxing as an example as well, because it's more history of that. Muhammad Ali's a perfect example. Like he was winning against top guys, and he probably should have retired, let's say 76 or 75 after the Thriller in Manila when he finished fighting Joe Frazier for the 3rd time. Okay, anything after that was just reckless. But he was still winning predominantly, and he was still fighting top 10 guys. But the other thing, if you watch on YouTube, you'll see Muhammad Ali doing sparring exhibitions against some of the best up-and-comers in the world. And he's doing hard rounds where these guys are trying to knock him out. And he's sitting there moving around. He's taking this. That stuff does the damage too. When you've got guys, because when you get to a certain level as a fighter, you can't have an easy day in the gym, even if you're not training. Every guy wants to come after you and wants to, try to get a piece of the pie. So you can't you can't practice because they want to knock you out.
I've heard a lot of fighters talk about this, about not sparring with the younger guys. I'll be like, no, like I want my sparring partner. I want somebody I know, somebody I trust, somebody I know is not going to be like trying to go all gung ho and has something to prove.
It's not even that they're necessarily trying to prove something. They're bloody unco and retarded. The amount of times you have young guys that everyone's obsessed with speed and power, but not control, never control. They don't like, let's say I throw a jab, left high kick, right? If my training partner can stand there with his hands down, that's what they should be aspiring for. I should not hit them in the face because I'm off balance. I should not slam that kick into their skull because I'm off balance. But all these guys, they train like a bunch of morons. They go boom, 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 and they're hitting their training partners all the time. They're smashing their training partners when they should be practicing technique. Same as when they're hitting submissions. Instead, they should be practicing control. They swing in, their training partner gets time to tap, boom. They're reaping on submissions. Like they're just yanking and cranking them on. They're like picking their opponents up, slamming them into the ground. They're doing all this sort of stuff. And the most important commodity you have in fight camp is your training partners. You should, if you want to hit the bag hard, hit the bag hard. Don't hit your training partner hard. But that's the trouble. You can't teach them control because they all want to highlight reel. They want to highlight reel in the gym in practice, not in the cage. And all that's going to happen is they're going to injure themselves. They're going to injure their opponents. And while they're brand new, that's all fun and games. But let's see how many of these guys make past 10 fights and how many of these guys continue this into their 30s. And that's where the problem is. So, you're talking about, you're moving around, say you've got an injury that you're trying to protect. You're just moving around.
And that's why, is that why a Randy Couture Is that why a Randy Couture is so rare?
Yeah, I think so.
You know,
I mean,
I mean, what he was a champion at 44 years old. You know,
yeah,
I mean, yeah,
I think
that's
also he started late too. So you have a lot
well,
of these guys.
he stopped and then he came back. I mean, there was
Yeah,
a
he was like
little.
what 34, 35 when he started MMA. So he was sort of
Yeah, he may have been, but he was also when he started, he was light heavyweight. And when
yeah,
he got the championship of light heavyweight, and then he stopped for a couple of years, and then he went up to heavyweight and
yeah,
beat Tim Sylvia and became the heavyweight champion at like
yeah,
44 years old.
yeah,
So
exactly, which is awesome.
yeah,
He's
I
good
love
at
that guy. I love that guy.
yeah,
Like I
yeah,
get
same, same.
it's
But,
like,
you can have like
that
hard
style is so gone though, man. His style of
yeah,
fighting, it's like non-existent.
yeah. You don't see
I want to see somebody dirty box again, man.
yeah, even like like say Chow Sonnen, that type of pressure wrestling, hit him in the clinch, hit him in the cage, and wear them down in the ground. Like yeah, you don't see that much. I think maybe because the type of wrestlers that are coming through, like you're not getting as many Greco kind of guys because their postures up, the way that they work the body locks. Say you're getting a lot of more freestyle guys, or grappler wrestlers, that
Mm.
sort of thing, where they're and maybe a lot
Chael
of
seems
wrestlers.
pretty high on Bo Nickel.
Yeah,
He thinks Bo Nickel's something special, and
yeah,
he still watches wrestling events
yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah.
college wrestling, and he thinks Bo Nickel's something special. So
Well,
we'll see.
the other thing I was thinking about that is a lot of these wrestlers, let's say pure wrestlers, and that are coming from college at amateur pedigree, they can go off into grappling and learn some submission grappling, learn control, use their athleticism, not have to worry about striking, not have to change their posture too much, and make more money.
Mm.
They don't have to worry about getting punched in the face, getting kicked, because a guy like Randy, he had boxing when he was in the army or whatever, but they've got a different mentality. They're a fighter first, and then you know what I mean. Like he's in there,
Have you
and he
ever have you ever heard Chael talk about the early days of the gym?
yeah,
Oh, it's so cool. He's like, yeah, Randy came in one day and just threw us gloves and was like, we're doing this now. He's like, oh yeah. It was like what Randy, Dan Henderson, and Chael Sonnen and just like beating the shit out of each other.
yeah,
Like
cool.
to be a fly on the wall.
And the Raw team back then, they had some really good guys too.
Mm,
Like they
yeah.
had some really good,
Oh, and then they became Team Quest.
yeah, team creation. Like Nate Flores,
They were
Santana went there, and
insane.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
I
think
mean,
Rico.
and they've done a good job of going. Team Couture has done a good job. Eric Nixick's awesome. Like
Yeah,
I love the guy. I love listening to him from a coach's standpoint. He's
yeah,
amazing. It's like because he's like, man, my job is to make you a better human, a better man.
yeah.
Like that's
That's
what I
rare.
do first. And I'm like,
Yeah,
that
that's
is
rare.
so cool, man.
Yeah,
Like he's got a really special like thing going on there
I think
at
that's the
Team
difference
Couture.
between a coach and a trainer. Like, because a coach should be a mentor, should
Well,
set an
his
example.
dad was a football coach.
Yeah, okay, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so he really picked up a lot from his dad.
Because a lot of these guys don't have strong. I'll be sexist here, but a lot of strong male role models in their
Right.
life, and so the coach is probably that person that is going to be that role model. And so you've got to. It's a huge responsibility if you're a hypocrite. If you say don't drink, don't smoke, whatever, don't do drugs, but then you're doing
Sorry,
lines and partying.
I
That
apologize. I'm a
no, no, no,
horrible
no. But
Romo.
fine. No, but what I mean is like say, you're in the gym and you're just drinking a beer while you're running the class,
Right,
then that
right.
hypocrisy, or if you're treating people really poorly, or if you're kind of money driven or whatever else,
Mm,
you kind of you're setting that. Whereas a trainer, the relationship is just to get this person fit, maybe show them a few punches or kicks and throws. And I think that's why a coach is a very sacred sort of role. And I guess martial arts have sensei or teacher. And I think sometimes MMA has sort of strayed away from that martial art for better and worse, but it's strayed away from that martial art sort of pedigree that it once had. Now it's gone down more of a combat sport. And then when the combat sport comes in, it becomes just business. It becomes, an athleticism. It becomes more of the human element sometimes gets lost a little bit too much. It becomes more of a production. And I think there's a problem there.
I think that's why the whole Sean Strickland winning the title like felt so big to so many people
Yeah.
because he didn't have a relationship with his parents, right? His parents were both alcoholics. They were abusive to him. He ran away from home at 14 years old, found himself in an MMA gym at 17 years old, and was like a lone wolf teaching himself how to fight. Had 21, he had 17 fights by the time he was 21 years old. And then he found Eric Nixick, and Eric Nixick just took him under his wing and made him part of the team. And it's like, that's awesome, man. That's like, that's a real story there, you know?
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think there's something about,
And he won't sell his fucking Hyundai, no matter how much money he fucking makes. That fucking stubborn son of a bitch. Get yourself a truck, dude. Even fucking Nina Drama bought you $100,000 brand new truck, and you told her to take it back. Just take the fucking truck, damn it. But he's like, damn, he's like, I don't want to drive something that's nicer than what my fans are driving.
Yeah, that's nice.
That's fucking interesting, man. He's an interesting guy, man. It's like,
that is interesting.
Yeah, I really like the guy. The more I pay attention to him, the more I'm like, this guy's something special. Like,
and sometimes people that are real human beings like that, they're unrefined. And so if like being media savvy is extremely hard for a lot of sports players, like a lot of athletes in different sports, because they've never thought about that next level. They think about winning and beating the best, but they never think about how they have to present themselves, how they have to articulate themselves, what they can and cannot say. And so you've got someone like him, and someone's going to say to him, "Oh, what do you think about Aleppo? What's Aleppo?" That he's going to get that moment in modern MMA and modern UFC. People are going to expect him to know everything and anything, and so he's going to just come off the cuff, unrefined and incoherent at times, because he's a bloody human being. You know what I mean? And he's just a
normal dude.
Exactly.
He's like, when you listen to him talk, it's like, I could have met this guy at the bar.
Yeah. And you know what? I think the fans sometimes forget that. What happens is they think that these people that go from being a guy that's getting paid $1,000, $2,000 a fight to a guy that's getting paid 10 to 100 grand a fight is a matter of a year sometimes for some of these guys. You know what I mean? Like they just 1 or 2 wins away from being that. And then all of a sudden they go from being a guy that on social media has 40 followers to 500 followers to suddenly 50,000 to 500,000,
a million,
to doing Joe Rogan or a pod, and then they're suddenly in that 1 year period expected to become, a nice package deal,
polished.
And their job is still just to get in there and kick a man in the face.
Yeah, my job is to go in there and beat the shit out of somebody.
Yeah,
like, what do you care what I say?
And then fans will get all upset, like, oh, this person said this, or this person said that Hillary Clinton was this, or Donald Trump was that. It's like, the dude's just a normal guy. He's just passing on hearsay that he probably had a conversation with at a work lunch once.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's
he's funny. He's a funny guy, though. He is a funny character. He's a guy that I could see myself sitting down and having a conversation with and having a lot of fun. He's like, it's the CTE, guys. It's all that CTE. It's like, all right, yeah, okay. I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right. I don't know what I'm talking about either. I like the guy. I think he's an interesting champ. And I think it really caught the UFC off guard. I think so too. Like back when I was growing up, he would have been the champ, right? And nobody would have thought twice about it.
Yeah.
But the way that showmanship is nowadays and everything's going, and the way that he beat Israel Adesanya. Have you watched that fight yet?
Yeah.
Jeez, the way he beat.
I feel with that fight, I feel there was 2 things happened. Is that Strickland trained to win that fight, specifically to win that fight. Like, studying Israel, knowing him, working the timing.
That is not what happened at all as far as Eric Nixick is concerned. Eric says, I wanted him to wrestle and he refused.
But you know what? But what would Israel expect? Because Israel's got pretty good reflexes when it comes to that. But like, I had a guy that fought Israel back in 2012, a kickboxing fight, right? So our game plan was, and having a game plan and implementing it, 2 different things. like was to try to make the fight messy and try to hit the guy, like hit Israel every time Israel. So to try to turn Israel into a lead and not a counter fighter, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, but trying to get that, to having the skill, to having the physical, the mental discipline, and the timing to do that is incredibly hard in kickboxing or MMA. And the fact that Sean did it like he did was
I thought the amount, and this is, I'm not a fighter. I've never professionally fought, so I may be completely off here. What I saw happening was he took the space away from Israel.
Yeah, he did. He suffocated.
And so that pressure that he put on him, it made him uncomfortable because Israel plays everything off of a kick. Everything starts with a kick. And but the fact that Israel couldn't get his kick started, you even heard him after, what was it, after the third round? He said, I can't find my jab. Well, his jab plays off of his kicks.
Yeah.
So he couldn't get anything going. And so it was frustrating him. And then at the end of the fight, when Sean's yelling in his fucking face and he wouldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Like Sean's hands are down and he's screaming at him. I thought we were going to fight, like, it's like, you just broke him mentally. It was like, I don't think Israel had ever been in a position to where he couldn't land anything. And I think what happened, it just broke him mentally, because it's like, I've never experienced this. That's what I mean. That's just my obsession.
Yeah. I think so like, say with someone like Sean, like you take those half steps and you break there every time Israel's moving, trying to get range and trying to get angles and that, you're just suffocating him. Like you're suffocating a fire. And so your punches are staying clean and sharp. And Israel, being tall and long, likes to use those reach and those range shots. That takes tremendous discipline to do that. Like that's, like, because normally you want to, in MMA, you want to punch and grab, or you want to hit your shot. And, Israel was probably expecting that mentality, not to have someone who's trying to be perfect in boxing where it's just punches, would be Ray Mercer versus Lennox Lewis, specific and particular range. Now, on the flip side of that, before he got to the UFC, Israel had scores of kickboxing fights. And he was pretty like, in Adelaide, he was fighting here in South Australia a fair bit on kickboxing shows. He was a headliner. We always knew that he was going to be the next big thing. Like whether it was going to be in kickboxing or MMA, we didn't know. But at that time, he had like maybe one MMA fight, and the guy just laid on him and just blanketed him. So he was more of a striker. All of that experience and all that training leads to a fighter that becomes a diminished product, essentially. And Israel trains a lot. He's a disciplined guy. He is a lot of things, but he's a talented athlete and fighter.
Oh, and absolutely.
You think about Roy Jones Jr. when he started declining. Like Roy Jones Jr. is all about reflexes and timing. Israel's the same thing. So when you're a reflex sort of fighter, Anderson Silva is a perfect example as well. When you're a reflex range type fighter, all of a sudden you just become a declined entity. And it's really hard to come back off that. Whereas, say, guys that have more fundamental styles like Randy Couture and all that, they can stay and sustain it longer because they're not working on reflex and all that sort of stuff. They're working on, grind and grit and, that pressure, that sort of thing. So I think you had that type of situation where it's Israel's maybe on a decline, and I hate to say that about any athlete, and Strickland just was perfect for that fight and had this more than anything else and suffocated Israel.
One question I have about the Israel thing, but I want to take this from kind of a different angle.
Yeah.
All right. So in mixed martial arts, fighting in general, I would say mentality is extremely important.
Yeah.
And Israel Adesanya, if you watch what he's done over the last few years, he would like hype himself up and he would be talking a lot of trash about his opponent, right? He had gotten so hyped up for Dricus, and Dricus actually couldn't take the fight on 9 weeks. They wanted to push Dricus out of beating Robert Whittaker 9 weeks later to fight Israel Adesanya in Perth. And Dricus, like, I have a hurt. I think he broke his foot. He's like, I can't do it. So he had to back out. So it was, and then there was 3 weeks with no opponent. And then when Sean finally got the okay from the UFC and got his he had to get his passport and everything situated, because he didn't even have a passport. The dude's such a redneck. He got all that situated. There was only 4 weeks left to train for him. So psychologically, I think Israel was psyched out, like, because of the amount of money he makes, he has to find that edge. He has to find something to motivate him. And with Sean, there was nothing to motivate him.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of it. Part of it was mental. I would guess. He even to this day, he just said this week he's taking a long hiatus off of fighting. He's like, don't expect to see me for a long time. I think something mentally broke in him when that Dricus fight fell through. Like he was all amped up for that, wanting to have that Africa versus Africa thing, and the white African versus the black African, and have that whole thing going on for him. And that didn't work out. And when Sean stepped in, I don't think he was there for him mentally. And I think Sean just broke him, because it was like, this guy has nothing on me. There's no reason this guy should be able to compete with me. And then he just beat me for 4 rounds out of 5. Like, there's something wrong with me. I think that really depleted him mentally. I don't know.
But that could be true. But there's sometimes some fighters just have the recipe for another fighter, and they don't have to be a better fighter. Like Dennis Hallman, I think it's Dennis Hallman, and Matt Hughes, perfect example. Matt Hughes is objectively one of the best welterweights, one of the best MMA fighters in human history. Most people don't know who Dennis Hallman is, right? But he beat him twice, nearly the same way. You know what I mean? Like,
oh God, you're saying it now. It's like triggering it. I'm like, oh shit, yes, that fight.
That happens. Some people just have that sort of thing, like where for whatever reason they get caught. That person has the mental and the physical abilities and instincts and intuition to beat another person. And it doesn't matter what, it could be wrestling, could be boxing, could be kickboxing, whatever the combat sport code. Some guys just have it in them. And maybe Strickland mentally, physically, and all that, and stylistically has that in him for an Israel type fighter. I mean, we don't know, but we saw the proof. We saw.
I just know when I watch Strickland, it brings me back to the days of Randy and Chuck Liddell, and it brings me back to those days.
Yeah,
his style of just that in your face, rough and tough. I'm not going to back down. You do whatever the hell you want to do to me. Like that style, it just speaks to me, because I grew up watching that, and I'm like, I love this guy. His personality, he's funny, like I'm like, this guy's, I like this. I like watching this guy. You and I have been talking about Perry a lot, because I've gotten into watching BKFC, and you like the bare knuckle more than you like the UFC. And I get that from Perry too. Like I like Mike Perry. I just like him. It's like, I know this guy. Like I don't know him, but I know him. Like I can listen to him talk. I watch the way he acts. I know this guy. He looks just like my cousin. It's like, I know this guy. He talks just like my cousin. He's about as redneck as my cousin. Like, I know this guy. And it's like, okay, like, and so some of these guys are just relatable. Israel Adesanya is not relatable on any stretch of the imagination. Like, people that like Israel Adesanya like that flashy lifestyle. It's like the people that like KSI, the people that like Jake Paul, the people that like Logan Paul, they like that fly. I don't like that. I'm like, no, like I want a Sean Strickland, Alex Volkanovski. I love Alex. I love watching Volkanovski fight. He's so entertaining. And it's like, this guy was a 214-pound rugby player just 10 years ago, and here he is, the king of the 145-pound division, 5'6", can get up to 240. Dude could fight heavyweight.
Wouldn't that be awesome? Wouldn't that be cool to see?
He could take every belt.
Yeah, like a Sam Langford in the UFC.
It's like, watch out, John Jones, here I come, bro.
Yeah.
It's like, damn, so like those are the fighters that I really like. I've
Yeah.
always kind of like been attracted to. So, Rampage. Rampage was another one. I loved Rampage. He was one of the most fun fighters ever to fight in the history of UFC. He was just so much.
It's funny. It's funny how you do have, like, whether it's styles or even personalities. Like, say for me, like, I like small heavyweights. I like undersized heavyweights, and especially when they aren't, they're not showy.
Oh,
or
like
anything
Frank
that.
Shamrock. He
Oh.
he looked huge, but he wasn't a big heavyweight.
No, Ken Shamrock. Yeah. No, that's right.
Oh,
No, he
Ken
wasn't.
Shamrock. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's sometimes listed at 6'2", but he's only 6 foot, I reckon. He'd probably only be 6 foot, maybe.
Right. And he was barely 220.
Yeah, exactly.
Barely.
Shredded. 205, 210.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was a good guy, good ground and pound, good early leg submissions, good, even what we were talking about before with the Raw team, like how much of an impact the Lions Den was back in the day. Like the studs that he had coming through them, like, Trey Telligman, Guy Mezger, Mikey Burnett, like all these guys, like, these
his brother. And Black Zillas too.
Yeah. Shoot box.
Yeah. Shooter box is fucking awesome. They have this kid now. Did you see that kid fight? He's 23 years old. He just fought oh God, I can't think of the guy's name now. He fought ranked number 10 at 125. And he hung in there, man. It was his first UFC fight. He got called up on short notice. He's from Shooter Box.
Oh,
yeah. 23 years old. I'll find the fight for you because it just happened.
Yeah, please do.
3 weeks ago, I want to say it is when it was. Manel Kopp. He fought Manel Kopp.
Yep.
And Kopp's a bad dude. He's all about Kai Kara France. He wants to fight Kai Kara France. and he was talking trash about Kai Kara France the entire time. And this kid got in there, 23 years old, and he went the distance with Manel Kopp. And I mean, he lost, but hey, man, you're 23 years old. You just went the distance with a top 10 guy, your first chance in UFC. Like, that's
crazy.
Great,
Yeah. It's crazy the maturity of some people. Like, I don't want to keep bringing up boxing, but I was going to bring up Wilfred Benitez, right? He won the welterweight title at 17. So it's not like he just was in high school and goes, you know what, on the weekend I'm going to fight the welterweight title. He had to work his way to the welterweight title before that. So there's years as a teenager, as a professional, fighting some of the best fighters in the world. Then at 17, he wins the title and holds it. Like, just think about that. Like, how many 17-year-olds, can you imagine in a really competitive weight division, in a really exciting period in history of the combat sport? And like, can you imagine that coming through now? Like, like 23 to 17, that's 6 years. That's a big difference in development. But we look at 23, 22-year-olds as pretty immature. But
I mean, John Jones won the title at 23.
Yeah, exactly.
He's considered like the greatest. Nobody's ever won it at a younger age in MMA.
Yeah, exactly. And you think about that, like even him, like, he just happened to get into it because I think Rashad didn't fight or something. Was it? No, who was it? Someone couldn't fight, so he replaced him short notice against.
I don't remember. Man, it's been so long.
Either way, he ran with it. He wins it, and runs with it. And then he fought some of the most diverse challengers and champions in the sport's history. Like the guys that he fought and beat, like all different types. Like, and we had in that period in the late 2000s and through the 2010s, we had some really interesting fighters, like really different types of fighters too.
Yeah.
Now, now it's almost homogenized, the sport. Like all those fighters, like there are different styles, don't get me wrong, but it's not as diverse as it once was.
Yeah.
So
no doubt. Cool.
Physically and
well, I'm looking at time. I gotta get to bed here pretty soon because I gotta get up in the morning. But I wanted to ask you, Mike Perry's supposed to fight in December. You want to do an episode on BKFC in December?
That'd be awesome. Yeah, done.
Yeah, because I'm definitely. So I saw Darren Till was on Ariel Hawani yesterday.
Yeah.
So he's saying he's going to Misfits
Yeah.
to box right now because,
Yeah.
you know, he asked the UFC to let him go so he could explore some different options. Darren Till's only 30. He wants to fight Mike Perry next year in Misfits. He wants to get a Misfits fight in December. Jake Paul says he's fighting in December. So we might see a Darren Till versus Jake Paul fight in December. Mike Perry's fighting BKFC in December. Then next year, we're going to be looking at Mike Perry versus Darren Till, which I'm stoked about because they've been talking about fighting for 6 years. I want them to fight.
That'd be cool. That'd be cool.
You know, they used to be training partners.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. I want them two to fight. That's why I sent you that video the other day. I was like, this looks great. Just go. Because, I mean, Till looks big, though, man. He's put on some weight since he left the UFC.
That's the thing. Like some of them, it seems almost like they get healthier.
He said he's been doing a lot more weight training. That's what he said. Okay. He said he's been off. I mean, he's been off now for his last fight was against Dricus when Dricus beat him. Yeah. And so he's been off now for 9 months. He said he's been doing a lot of weight training for the last 9 months.
Oh, cool.
So he's put on a lot of weight, a lot of mass. But awesome. Yeah, we'll do we'll do that. We'll make a plan.
Yep.
For the December BKFC.
All right, done.
I don't know what time. I don't know what time it'll play there in Australia. So we may not do it live as the fights are going. We might do it like the day or a couple of days after or something like that. We'll figure out. We'll figure out how the
depending on what time we can try to do it live. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, no, it would be fun to do like a watch along party, but I think it typically starts here at like 3 in the afternoon and it goes to like 9 at night, 10 at night.
Yeah.
Which would be, I mean, 7 is 11 your time. So that would be 10 would be then that would be 1 o'clock in the afternoon your time.
Yeah.
So it would start 4 hours before 11. So that would be 7. So yeah, you could do it. It'd be an early morning. It'd be a morning of fights for you. You'd leave the house being like, let's fucking go.
I gotta go train now. Cool.
You get to the gym and kill somebody.
I'm gonna do heavy bag now.
All right, brother. Well, what you got to plug, man? What you got going on?
I guess the Libertarian Institute. I'm fortunate that they let me write and publish some of my stuff there.
I'm fortunate they let me post this naughtiness up on their website too. I can't believe this is just a complete shit show as far as I'm concerned. It's like thousands of people want to listen to my phone calls. I can't figure it out.
Well, sometimes I'll submit something to Scott and I think he's not gonna accept it, and then he'll accept it and he'll publish it. I'm thinking, okay. It's like I feel very lucky sometimes.
No, do you submit it directly to Scott?
Yeah, I normally submit to him.
You know the shortcut. You know the shortcut. If you can get everything submitted, if you submit it to Hunter, you don't even have to. Yeah. Scott won't even have a say in it. He might take it down 2 days later, but it'll get up there.
well, I just had a habit just from when back in 2016 when Scott first started the institute. I just messaged him. So I was lucky with that, and then sometimes I think, this is a little bit abstract, a little bit too philosophical. It might not gel, but he's been even when I used to put fictions through, I'd put anti-war fictions and that through. And he'd accept that sometimes. I think I've had 1 rejection, maybe 2 rejections or whatever.
Nah, Scott's good as long as you put the time in and you're thoughtful. He's like, I got something out of it. Somebody's gonna want to read it.
I know, it's blessed. Yeah. But I've also got my own page, halfcage.com, which is the stuff that I write at the Institute will eventually go up there, but I also got my fiction. I've written 3 novels now. And just sometimes I'm gonna start writing about training and fighting again. I'll just randomly put up blog bits about, training when you're sore and all this sort of stuff. But so I guess those 2 spots.
Yeah, and you and I talk about fighting all the time. As if anybody can't tell, this is what this is what we talk about. We don't talk about libertarianism.
No,
I was like, one of these things makes a difference, and it's not libertarianism.
Yeah, exactly. How to punch a man in the face.
so yeah, we talk fighting all the time, and we have a lot of the same interests. And I really enjoy chatting with you, man. I enjoy the back and forth we have, and
That's
all
cool,
that.
bro.
Yeah, so we'll continue that, and we'll do something for that Mike Perry show coming up in December, the BKFC in December. We'll do something. Maybe we'll make it a monthly thing because BKFC is only once a month. So maybe we can
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, that'll be fun because BKFC is fun.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah, man, that's old school, man.
and it's getting big here in Australia too. Like in Queensland. It's
good. Up. Yeah, good,
like
man. Dude, I'm loving it. Like the first one I watched was the one I told you about with Perry and Rockhold. And and then is Alvarez versus Mendez. Dude, that Alvarez Mendez fight. Did you watch that fight?
No, I haven't watched it. I'm going to watch it when I've got it.
Oh my gosh. It was like Alvarez knocked down Mendez. Mendez got up, knocked down Alvarez. And that whole fight was like that, back and forth for 5 rounds. It was awesome, man. And it was like, these are 2 guys I wish I would have seen fight in the UFC, you know?
Yeah.
Because I watched both their careers and they were different weight classes, but they came together. Dude, they just beat the hell out of each other. It was so awesome. But I remember after I watched that Perry Rockhold fight, I was like, I don't know if I can watch this. And then I had already downloaded the app and paid the $50 a year. So I was like, the next time, like my wife wasn't around, and I was like, screw it. Like I'm watching porn. I'm like, I'm like sneaking
bloody men.
Yeah, I'm like sneaking into
each other's faces.
Yeah, I'm sneaking into it, watching it, and I'm just like, geez, these guys are freaking awesome. Yeah, so yeah,
I would love it if MMA went back to bare knuckle, no holds barred again.
Well,
how good would that be?
I would watch the hell out of it. Like, well, I only miss it now if there's women on the main event. Like, that's the only time I don't watch it. It's just I can't do that. I'm like, I can't encourage the behavior. Like, I just can't do it. But you know, I mean, I think Amanda Nunes is gone, so I don't think we're gonna have any women main events for quite a while. It's gonna be a while. But yeah, no. I would be all for it. Or if they kind of incorporated it and did something like ONE FC does, where they have different things going on.
Yeah.
Like, I like that. It keeps me interested, you know.
And even Muay Thai, like Muay Thai with the little gloves and a cage, is a different animal than what it is in the ring with the big gloves.
Yes, it is.
Like,
yes, it is.
Difference.
Yeah. What's that guy's name? That fights ONE FC. They did that match with this guy, Rod Tang. Rod Tang.
Rod Tang.
They had Rod Tang versus Mighty Mouse.
Yeah.
And so the first round was Muay Thai.
Yep.
And the second round was MMA. The third round was Muay Thai, and the fourth round was and Mighty Mouse was like, I knew if I could just survive the first round, I could choke him out into the second round.
Yeah.
but it was cool. It was like, all right, this is something different, you know, like we're getting like a little different flavor going on there with ONE FC. It's a pretty interesting thing to watch. I don't watch it every time it's on, but it is.
Yeah, it's good.
Interesting. I like watching it every once in a while.
And even the MMA fights have a different rhythm to them. Like there's a different focus.
They don't have big guys. All their guys are small. So it's all fast.
Yeah.
And I used to, like, back in the day, because when I started watching MMA, I was watching UFC 1, UFC 2, UFC 3. There were no small guys. It took me a long time to get accustomed to watching the speed that the small guys put on.
Well, especially in the early days of UFC, when it was 200 pounds and up and 200 pounds and down.
Right.
You know, and then it was like, what was the lightweight?
Yeah, Hoist Gracie choking out sumo wrestlers and
176 pounds. Crazy.
That dude was a monster for as small as he was. He was like, what, 160 pounds? He was choking out that 200-pound sumo wrestler like it was nothing. He jumped up there and threw that triangle on him.
Manny Yarbrough, when
hell?
200-pound Keith Hackney knocking out 616-pound Manuel Yarbrough.
Yeah,
just kept throwing ridge hands at him and breaks his own hand.
Who was the guy? He had a mustache. That's all I can remember. He kind of looked like Tom Selleck, and he would take the dude down.
Don Fries?
he would get, no, not Don Fry. It was
Dan
another
Severn,
guy.
Dan Severn.
It might have
Dan
been Dan Severn. He would get
Yeah.
side mount and he'd just start punching him in the nuts until he tapped out.
Well, that's what Tank Abbott said. Tank Abbott said, I just got raped by Freddie Mercury on steroids. Because Dan Severn's like,
Dan Severn.
Yeah. But this brutal.
Yeah, Dan Severn. I could not remember his name. I know Don Fry. Don Fry's hilarious.
Check out Don Fry and Dan Severn's podcast. I think it's like they've got a podcast.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Dude, Nina, you know Nina Drama? She's like that comedian. She's like this comedian, but she was a Playboy model back in the 90s, and she's a comedian, and now she does interviews for UFC. And so she travels. She just did an interview not that long ago with Don Fry and asked Don Fry if Sean Strickland was his long lost kid. It was hilarious, man. It was funny.
I'll check that out.
Yeah, she's really good friends with Sean Strickland. So they do a lot of stuff together. But the one that she did with Don Fry cracked me up. I was dying. She was like, do you have any children you don't know about? And he's like, well, how do I know if I don't know about them?
If you want to watch something entertaining, watch on YouTube the old Panther product videos, like the old VHS tapes, Don Fry's free fighting or whatever, and it's just him talking about training and fighting and stuff like that. It's glorious. It's all Don Fry glory. Like it's not as entertaining as Bass Ruten's, like boom, but it's got some good Don Fry elements in it.
Boss Ruten's
it'll put Boss
Ruten's Boss Ruten's a one of a kind though. Yeah, but Don Fry's excellent. He's hilarious.
Imagine a fight between Don Fry and Bass Ruten back in the day.
That would have been amazing.
That would be freaking awesome.
That would have been amazing. Why did that never happen? I think they were. Yeah, I think they were two different genres.
Yeah,
I think Boss Ruten was a little bit after Fry, but
I think he was Pancrest at that time.
I think if somebody would have offered Fry a little bit of money, he would have done it though. He didn't have any fucking qualms with fighting anybody.
Nah, I agree.
Yeah, that dude was a beast back in the day.
He fought K1 under K1 rules.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, he was like,
yeah, he didn't care. He was awesome, man. I love that old UFC. Is I remember I was sitting there. I think it was UFC 7. And it happened to be on my 16th birthday. So my mom agreed to pay for it. Right. So cause like I watched, she would walk in on me watching UFC like I'd be watching porn through the squiggly lines. And she'd walk in and she'd be like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm watching UFC. And it was like, I want to say it was at least UFC 7. Because UFC 2, I was 14. I want to say it was UFC 7. I was 16. And they actually bought it for me. And she sat on the couch and I sat in the recliner and she sat there like this the whole time watching. She's like, how do you watch this? I was like, it's so fucking awesome.
I remember trying to show my grandma the first few UFCs on videotape, and she would sit there and watch it, and she was fascinated by it, but she couldn't understand that it was legal. She thought we're watching something forbidden, like we're watching a snuff film or something like that. Like, it was like there was something wrong, but she liked it, but she just didn't know why, and I was like, I want to do this. I'm like, no, you don't. But yeah.
If I would have known I could have made a living out of it, I probably would have done it, and I'd be a lot more retarded than I am today.
So. That's why I'm retarded.
That's why we get along.
It's the CTE.
All right, brother. Well, I'm gonna let you go, man.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks a lot for that. You have a good night.
I'm gonna stop the recording real quick.